Katoa. Welcome this morning to our Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting of the 13th of August 2020. No mai haramai. Your Worship, councillors, welcome. And we do have, of course, our committee members from the Lakes, from Rural, and of course Te Tata o Te Arawa. Members of the public, we have the press with us, and of course our staff. Ngā mihi kia koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Kia ora. We are streaming live this morning, so please, councillors, if you can just move your microphone closer to you when you're speaking so that we can be clearly heard. Mobiles, of course, are always turned off, and but we are going to be taking some breaks. I know people get a bit anxious if they don't get messages, so around 11 o'clock we will be taking a break, and so you can clear your phone messages at that stage. And then if we're continuing with our meeting after 11, of course we will be, then we'll be taking a lunch break at around 1 o'clock. So thank you, and of course we are in level 2. We all know what that means. We've been here before, social distancing, etc., hand washing and everything that we know about, so thank you for that. Look, I do apologise, I should have opened our meeting with a karakia. Thank you, Councillor Kumar. Thank you.
Namaste. Please be kind this morning with regards to my pronunciation. E te atua kaharawa, kokoi te tohu rangatira, te tohu mataranga. Mana katia mai matau, o pononga Aotearoa, e mahi ne ai au, matau mahi, mo te painga. Ona tangata o te kaunirera o Rotorua. Takua mai kia tau te rangimari, ki runga ai a matau ai nā wā katoa. Ko ihu karatai o ki tau matau ariki. Amini.
Amini. Tēnō pai. Tēnō pai. Tō karakia. Thank you. No apologies this morning. Kao. Kia ora. Declarations of interest?
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yes, Madam Chair. I will be declaring a non-financial conflict in respect of presentation 6.1, so I won't be asking any questions there. And
sorry, Councillor, can you just run that by me again, please? You're declaring a what, is that?
A non-financial conflict of interest in respect of the presentation at 6.1, so I won't be asking any questions there. And also item 7.1 on the agenda, so I won't take part in discussions or decision making on that.
Thank you very much. Thank you for noting that. We're noting that. Urgent items not on the agenda. Any? Thank you. Oh, thank you very much. Confirmation of our minutes. Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting. Minutes of the 23rd of July 2020. May I have a move and a seconder, please? Thank you, Mrs. Trumper. Thank you, Councillor Yates. That the minutes of the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting, minutes 23rd of July 2020, be confirmed as a true and correct record. It has been moved and seconded. Any amendments, changes? Thank you. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Thank you. Carried. Our first presentation of the day is at 6.1. This is an independent assessment of the impact and delivery of Grantworks. Thank you, JP. You're going to talk to this presentation. Morena.
Morena, everyone. We're just waiting for Sharon Van Gulik to join the meeting. So unfortunately, Sharon was intending to be here today to present in person, but she lives in Auckland, and because of the level 3 lockdown within Auckland, we've got her zooming in. So we're just waiting for her to join us. So councillors, I'll briefly introduce the presentation and the purpose of the presentation, and hopefully we'll see Sharon join us very soon. So councillors, this is an important presentation because it provides an independent overview of the Grantworks events so that it can assist you with your decision making in regard to the recommendation that's in item 7 about an uplift in the funding for Grantworks going forward, so lifting it from its current 150,000 per annum to a level of 250,000 per annum. So Sharon conducted the independent review of Rotorua Grantworks. It was really looking at the performance and the future considerations for the event. That was for Mountain Bike Events Limited. Her work was paid for by MB, who are also a significant contributor to this event. So Sharon has a significant level of experience in major events. Now, her report was given to Mountain Bike Events Limited as being commercial in confidence, so I've referred to that in the council report. So it's not available to us, but she will highlight her findings to you and give you her views of the event and how it fits against other major events across the country. So Sharon has extensive experience. I think we've just got her looking to join us. And I'll probably ask her if she can just, as part of her initial part of her presentation, just give a background to her experience, which should, I hope, give you the confidence about the quality of her review of the event. And probably the only one I would highlight at this point is she's currently Commercial Director of the New Zealand Olympic Committee. So that's sort of another piece of quite significance on her CV in regard to major events. So I think we've got Sharon with us at the moment. Hello Sharon, can you hear us okay?
Kia ora, good morning. It's okay. It's not great, but it's okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now Sharon, you may, in seeing the room, won't be able to see our screen. So if you give me a gentle wave, I will click through your slides, but hopefully you've got hard copies there so that you at least can direct yourself through your own slides. But as you say,
Yeah.
looking at the screen there, I doubt you can see our screen.
Good
No,
morning.
that's all right.
Good
Look,
morning, Sharon. Can
hear
you,
me clearly?
Sharon, can you hear me? I'm Meta Pecker, the Chair of the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee. Welcome this morning. Pleased to have you here. Although it wasn't, you were supposed to be with us in person, but it's nice that you can put the time in to be present by Zoom. Thank you very much. Kia ora, welcome.
Kia ora, Madam Chair. Thank you. Would you like me to commence now and go through the presentation?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. If we could just go to the first slide first, then please, which is independent review of Grantworks. We're just ready to say that this review was commissioned by MB and funded by Major Events. The fundamental brief, it was quite an extensive brief, is to review the performance of Grantworks against the investment objectives of all those parties who have invested, to develop recommendations in respect to ongoing sustainability and the commercial program in particular. And just to note that I, as an independent reviewer, I've not attended the event, have no experience of it per se, other than what I've been able to review, and as such an extraordinarily independent lens. So don't have any preconceptions. I'm reviewing it as I have done for MB, other major events around New Zealand with a quite an independent lens. If we go to the next page, please, which is 3. So in terms of delivering on its objectives, I have to tell you that Grantworks Rotorua delivers exceptional results, many of which I consider sector leading and very much best practice. You attract world-class athletes and you have a very strong competitor base with very large local New Zealand and international following and viewership. I think in particular something to note is that unlike many events of this genre, and particularly regional events, you have an extraordinary paid spectator audience, which is very unusual in major events and of this kind of genre, and I think you've done a remarkable job in that respect. You've had incredible growth over 6 years, and I don't know if you can read the table that I've got on screen there, but it will show you that the huge material improvements that have been delivered and escalations across the event across the 4 to 5 years or 6 years now that it's been held, and it's contributing quite extraordinary results, both in terms of viewership, in terms of on-site visitation, right through to its commercial and funding and revenue program, all of which are a huge testament to the leadership of the event itself. If I reflect, as I do with reviews of this nature, and ask the question, has it delivered on the on MBE's vision as Rotorua, the world's premier year-round mountain biking resort? I would have to say absolutely that it is delivering. It has delivered on that vision, but has work to do even more going forward. If the next slide, if you could pop to the next slide, please. I'm going to talk about different elements of the event to give you an overall picture, and I go through everything from the program to the finances to the commercials and the like. So I'll just it's kind of a page of findings. So in terms of the program, it's an incredibly diversified event program, and importantly, it delivers on major events, the major event funds investment priorities, which are that events that they support have to be internationally significant. They have to create social connection. They have to reflect and celebrate New Zealand culture and build national pride. Now, in my view, not many of the major events funders events in New Zealand deliver on all of these. Grantworks, Rotorua, does. So congratulations. In addition to that, as it's a sport event under the criteria of major events in New Zealand, Sport New Zealand also has its own investment criteria on top of the normal criteria, and that is that it needs to have high performance outcomes, engage with youth and targeted populations, and in particularly low participating communities. And again, this is an area where this event absolutely excels, that you were ahead of your time in bringing on board huge engagement programs and outreach programs into your community with those members of your community who are less able just by right to experience mountain biking, and you've really hugely delivered on that. And you know, the diagrammatic of the program that's in front of you just shows the breadth and depth of this event. If you look to the far right on that diagram, the red box on the right is the license, is you know, what has to be delivered under the license, international license, and in effect on the whole left-hand side is everything else you're doing in addition to ensure that this delivers on New Zealand's and Rotorua's investments objectives. So I think it's a real testament to the success of the program. In particular, I have to say you've proven to be very successful in getting young and underprivileged and special populations deeply involved and engaged in the culture of mountain biking, which has to be delivering huge enhanced benefit for Rotorua as well as New Zealand as a whole. So a very diverse and well thought through event program. Next slide, please. Importantly, in terms of international reach and impact, you're also knocking it out of the park at the moment. You're doing a very good job. You've had year-on-year growth of your coverage and impact by your over-the-top kind of broadcast platforms, and in particular, the recent deal with Red Bull Media, the digital platform globally, has grown that as well. You've got very, very strong paid and unpaid media and social channel following, and as well as that, a huge following in mountain bike circles in New Zealand and internationally. Now, numbers are numbers, and so it's hard. I can put this up and you can go, well, what does that mean? Well, again, you are probably outperforming the majority of events that are funded in some respects in major events for an event of this genre, with very strong audience development across the world, and in particular you're featuring very strongly in those countries that have a strength in mountain biking, which is really important around that high performance lens, but also shows that in terms of getting to potential travellers or potential audiences that may want to visit New Zealand and or Rotorua, you're nailing both of those metrics. You're dealing with both the sport audience and the kind of engaged fan audience very well. Next slide, please. So that leads to the question of, is it delivering Rotorua visitation and associated industry value? There are two positions. This event is positioned in two ways depending on the audience. So internationally, the event is positioned and marketed as the ultimate experience in mountain biking. In New Zealand, it's positioned as a memorable bucket list experience for mountain bikers. Quite different stories and approaches, but quite different audiences. Those approaches are certainly working, but I think there's still some room there to grow in overall marketing strategy. The good news is that the event has delivered year-on-year growth in attendance via your ticket sales, and you are therefore very much encouraging visitors to stay and play in Rotorua. You can see here on the right-hand side of the slide, this is just taking some of the recent data from last year's or this year's event, is that your top 5 domestic places of origin were Auckland, and then followed by Bapini, Waikato, and the lower North Island. So still very much a top 5 a North Island source of visitation, but actually very, very important in terms of where you want to be. You definitely want to be seeing Auckland at the scale that it is on that graph. I mean, I think the important thing to note is that the questions that have been asked is how important is this event to showcase Rotorua and to reinforce Rotorua's own positioning as the premier mountain bike destination in New Zealand. And I think it's absolutely critical. You don't grow, you need showcases, you need things that point the spotlight, that grow overall awareness and understanding of destinations, and this event certainly does this for you, particularly in the communities that are interested in mountain biking. The really important thing is it's not just an elite proposition. I think you're doing an extraordinary job as a showcase event in catering for all ages, and as such encouraging people to visit all year round. I think the other thing we can't underestimate is the impact of this event on associated industries and employment. Although we haven't, I think we need to put greater measures in place to measure, in particular the latter, just what that impact is. Next slide, please. This is a really complex looking diagram on the right. Don't worry about it too much, except to say with events of this genre that are based on international licenses or frameworks, often the commercial and the rights frameworks are complex. That is certainly the case with this event. So you have a rights structure whereby the international rights owner holds a certain number of rights and a certain number of commercial properties, and then you have the ability to sell other rights within New Zealand to New Zealand properties or other companies and the like. It is quite a complex framework. However, irrespective of the complexity of it, your team have done a very good job in maximising the potential out of this framework. They have, despite the complexity of it and the lateness in which properties are released to the local market to sell, so there's a period of time where it can be sold globally and then can be released locally. Despite that, you have managed to achieve year-on-year commercial growth and achieve some very strong financial outcomes. You've certainly, on the same basis, exceeded all current contractual KPIs and return on investment for partners. So I've had the opportunity to review all of the commercial agreements, and the rights and benefits extended and all have been met, if not surpassed. I would have said, having commenced this process pre-COVID, that there was potential for some more commercial upside by 2023 by looking at a 3-year commercial sales program. At the moment, most of the agreements are annual, which is very difficult. This is basically by nature of the international operation, which in my view needs to change. But in order to grow this, you do need investment and the right expertise to grow commercial revenues. I have to tell you, post-COVID, that's looking pretty dire. I can just tell you, wearing my hat as commercial director of the New Zealand Olympic team, that we're seeing globally an impact on commercial sponsorship of sporting events at the moment around 60% impact. We think that'll settle back to about 40% within 12 months, but it will take some time. We're thinking at least 2023 before we see some major recovery. There are some exceptions to that, and the exceptions to those rules tend to be the major global events, such as the Olympics, believe it or not, and Football World Cups and the like. But smaller properties are certainly going to be leaning into a difficult time over the next few years. From my perspective, it's really important going forward in order to safeguard the commercial rights and rights framework for Grantworks Rotorua, that any feeder events that might be developed that feed into the Rotorua event as a round, that could be either held in Australia or New Zealand itself, that Grantworks Rotorua must secure all the commercial rights to those feeder events to see the benefit from them. In other words, you've developed a very, very strong product in Rotorua that other events are going to want to be staged to feed into. You need to make sure, because you're the end point of that event process, that you secure the financial benefit associated with that as well. Next slide, please. So I guess overall, the big questions are, well, how has the event performed financially? I think you've got a very, very strong financial performance and revenue generation, in spite of the fact that you've underinvested significantly in the event and in driving this revenue. You have a situation where you've had growth in revenue, which is good, however, and exceeding the costs, but however, costs have been materially understated. So one of the problems I've found on my review of the event is that you've done a very good job of growing revenue, but your costs appear to be understated materially in a couple of areas, in particular around people and around some supplier deals that I'm not sure are sustainable. So in 2020, your commercial revenues were around 42% of your revenues, and that's up from 28% in 2015, but however, so are your costs. And it's important to note that you're required to increase these commercial revenues as major events reduce their investment. So you've had to offset public sector decline with private sector revenues. But as I said earlier, the real cost of the management of this event and your key suppliers, I believe, are understated significantly, which makes the event very vulnerable, relying on goodwill. And an event of this nature should not be relying on goodwill. It's a professional organisation with major contractual and commercial obligations, and goodwill is not a strong basis to manage that. I don't see a foreseeable future, I'm sorry, without increased public investment, and this is not just the case with Grantworks Rotorua, it is for most major events, but in particular in this one. And additional investment will be required over and above a normal operation just to see our way through COVID, in particular in the 21 and 22 events. Although I would anticipate, and we are all hoping for, a new normal to settle around 2023. So it's going to be very essential to secure greater working capital and the ability to grow new products and properties to grow the impact of the event, to secure increased funding. So you're performing very, very well at a very high level, but with underinvestment. You'll need to invest more to maintain your current delivery, and again, to grow new products and properties so that you can grow the commercial revenue base and grow the event further and deliver greater value across coming years through to the conclusion of the licence. Next slide, please. I hope my pace is okay. In terms of return on investment, we're looking now at measures that are not just economic but are also social and cultural, although it's important to note that measurement is not really in place yet around the social and cultural return on ROI kind of metrics, and there's some work being done in that space. Importantly, the event delivered a 3.3 million economic impact as assessed this year. That was a decrease on last year, but that decrease was wholly attributed to the immediate drop-off of international visitation with the commencement of the COVID-19 impact. I think importantly, the events delivered some almost 26 million cumulative economic impact in Rotorua since its establishment. And I have to say, of the events that I'm familiar with and have reviewed, and my knowledge of major events, it is one of the very few events delivering social and cultural impact at a very high level, with other critical factors such as employment and the consequential benefits of the event, such as growth of the sector, supporting industries as a result of the event as well, which we anticipate to be quite substantial and significant to your Rotorua community, as well as New Zealand's major event positioning. So from our perspective, you're performing extraordinarily well in delivering a broad range of economic, actual social and cultural benefit through this event. I would anticipate if this event did not continue, the converse would happen, and that you would see a substantial negative impact take place if the event was not held, because it is effectively the core showcase on which all those other activities and industries base a lot of their marketing and initiatives. So very key to that. Next slide. In terms of just another couple of points that I was asked to address in my review, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them, but we were asked to comment on the operations of the event, its governance and people. The event has delivered absolutely to New Zealand and international acclaim, and operationally, it's very world-class and best practice. I've been very impressed at the documentation, the management materials, the way the event's been operationally managed and led is extraordinary. Some of the best material and some of the best desk review I've ever done in that sense. And certainly my interviews with key stakeholders around the country, as well as major funders and those involved, supports that. But however, it's not sustainable insofar as there is significant stress currently on the operations and management with simply not enough staff for an event of this size. And you need to have a properly resourced event and properly resourced people to make sure that you can lead both delivery and focus on long-term planning and growth. You've been underfunding the event at an operational level for some time, and certainly over-reliant on volunteers. And I think your management costs are probably significantly underreported to the extent of between 50 to 70%. You have two full-time equivalent people working on this event, where you would have a minimum of 5 in other events of this size and scale. So I just wanted to reiterate that doesn't surprise me. Therefore, in the post-event reviews this year and in my work that I undertook, we saw some real stresses becoming apparent. So in order to maintain growth and expertise, you do need to invest in some more full-time resource for an event of this scale. And in particular, as you grow your contractual obligations and your funding obligations, you need to make sure you have the people to manage that and to fulfill those. It's really, really critical. Partner servicing is critical going forward, and that you need to invest in that as a matter of urgency. In respect of governance, a very well governed event. Reviewed all the documentation, the board minutes and the like. There's no lack of probity, but I have strongly recommended to the board that they consider diversity on their board. These days, Sport New Zealand requires, or is placing a requirement on any organisations that it funds to have a minimum of 40% on the board that identify as women, and certainly the Grantworks Rotorua board needs to address that. And I have also strongly recommended athlete representation on the board, which is best practice these days in sporting events, particularly where there is an elite element and a competitive element. You need to have the voice of the athlete around the table. So I've made both those recommendations to the board to consider as they move forward. Next slide. So those are my kind of core findings, but I think it's important to note that there's work to do. It's not perfect, it's very good, but not perfect. And there are certainly some opportunities to be leveraged. There is a real opportunity to secure a greater New Zealand broadcast coverage of the event. And I'm talking here about mainstream television coverage, just so you all know. The digital platforms are great, but they tend to have a more of a millennial focus and or dedicated follower focus. And these days, in a commercial world, you need, unfortunately, mainstream free-to-air or a subscriber-based broadcast that gives you greater reach and general awareness. And that's really important as well, to make sure that the event is coming to the awareness of non-mountain bike communities, and in particular to support your commercial program. So right now the commercial program comprises those who are directly involved with the mountain bike industry. This event has the ability to attract non-mountain bike partners, general organisations that see that relate to the values of and the profile of the event, and see what it's doing in its communities. There's an opportunity to certainly grow the brand and New Zealand engagement more, and I think that's really important for greater commercial growth and investment. I think there's some work to be done on refreshing the brand and marketing strategy, and frankly the focus should be domestic. In a sense, international looks after itself. There's a view there's no value in spending a lot of money internationally. That will come. The digital audience gives you that exposure. You don't need to invest materially in marketing there. The international license holder also does a lot of that work for you, but the focus should be predominantly on domestic. There's certainly an opportunity to negotiate, in my view, particularly having regard to COVID. It's going to put some pressures on everywhere, to look at this as an opportunity to negotiate some new commercial and rights structures with CEI, and in particular to give greater long-term confidence around the current rights program, so that you have the ability to go to market and sell 3 years of sponsorship and or partnering instead of 1, and importantly to be able to develop new products and assets that are Rotorua's own that you can sell and get people aligned with. And a lot of that thinking and work is underway. It's very impressive, the work that I'm seeing already that's being considered. And then finally, there's some work to do, and there's some new revenue generation potential upside and merchandise licensing and the ability to pull together tourism-related value-add offerings for visitors. So, you know, what are those packages to attend the event that would attract not a traditional mountain bike audience per se, but that would get somebody who was more of a recreational rider, that would get them to the event. And there's certainly potential for that to be developed going forward. You can flip to the next slide, thanks. Other things to do, I mean, certainly there's work to do investing in people and new product development, as I said. So when we look at bringing on more people, we've got to make sure that those people are focused on revenue generation initiatives, i.e. the side of the business that keeps the business going. It's very, very important. I also think and I've recommended that we need to undertake greater independent research to actually measure the awareness attributes and affinity and understand potential audience opportunities from a marketing perspective. So right now, a lot of it's intuitive, but we need more informed insight, and that can only come from research. It doesn't cost a lot, but it's very powerful and very important. And also, there's a general view that the current impact assessment is good, but it's limited. It's limited just to economic, and it's with a very much a tourism lens. And in our view, we need to scope and brief a new impact assessment reporting framework that delivers on all stakeholders' requirements, not just MBs and yourselves as councils, but other commercial partners and other funding partners as well, and looks at the broader impacts of this event, including visitor economic contribution, and those trickier ones to measure but can be done around social, cultural impact, as well as what contribution this event is having to the broader mountain bike infrastructure within the Rotorua region and supporting services. And that investment needs to be prioritised into doing this impact research. People hate an event spending time on research, but this is a solid proposition. It's a business, and it needs to have this level of impact assessment and great insight to help you go forward. Next slide. So just 2 slides to go. So in essence, the key question that's being asked at this event is can Grantworks Rotorua become sustainable without ongoing public investment? Now, can I just firstly say that this question assumes that public bodies don't have an ongoing role in investing in events vis-a-vis other promotional and community initiatives. And my view is that is simply the case, that the public and public funders do have a role and have forever had a role in investing in events, and they are as valid as any other marketing and promotional or community initiative, provided they deliver the return on investment anticipated. From my perspective, there's a real opportunity to consider what Grantworks Rotorua could achieve for the people of Rotorua and New Zealand going forward if it had more additional public and private investment. And certainly the way this event is performing, it seems that potential is substantial. But however, this does require quite a long-term and strategic view, as well as understanding the unique roles that events do play in driving economic, social and cultural well-being and prosperity. And that long-term view needs to be more than a year. So one of the problems with annual events is you get yourself into a messy cycle of thinking year by year. It's simply got to be more strategic, and my report recommends that investment decisions be made to the length of the licence, to actually be to a enable the event to flourish and grow within secure funding and secure investment going forward. And so to that end, my conclusion on the final slide there, the next slide, is that Grantworks Rotorua in its current form is not sustainable without increased public investment, and that would have been the case irrespective of COVID. I have to tell you, however, with COVID impact, it's even more essential, and which is why we're seeing the government and public bodies step in and supporting all of our initiatives at the moment. The focus needs to be on surviving in 21 and 22 while being ready to thrive from 23. And that needs both working capital to remain financially sustainable and to deliver on that long-term event strategy through to the conclusion of the CEI licence. So I guess in summary, my view is that Grantworks is critical to Rotorua's economic development and your positioning, and in particular in achieving increased visitation year-round, and really importantly, in growing the supporting business ecosystem, whether it's accommodation, whether it's visitor attraction, whether it's the direct mountain suppliers and ecosystem around that this event is absolutely critical in supporting all of those and your growth and aspirations going forward. And that's me. Very happy, Madam Chair, to answer any questions that anyone might have.
Thank you very much for your comprehensive report, Sharon, and obviously the fact your experience. You were able to give us you were highlighted what we do very well and what we've done very well, and that we were ahead of our times. Because if you can just bear with me, Sharon, I think that Dave Donaldson, Councillor Donaldson, and the biking community, the mountain biking community in Rotorua, should take a bow. I remember, Dave, 6 years ago when you and the mountain biking community came to us, and the opposition from around this table to that, to your proposal, to your business plan. So kia ora to you and to the mountain biking community. But it has also highlighted where we need to go further. But I am going to ask Her Worship to speak to the presentation this morning. Sharon, our Worship is here with us too, of course.
Kia ora, Sharon, and thank you for presenting. We've never had a presentation quite as thorough as that is independent, seen as independent. I found it incredibly helpful for us. Just in our recommendations that we're considering this morning, with our level of investment, it is incumbent on that MB scrutiny as well. Are things tightening up there from MB? And I know that you're involved through Olympics and other major events. Are we up with the ballpark there as far as MB's expectations? Because you talked about the percentage of revenue that they look at and the percentage of local investment. What would their view be of us?
Well, I'm not MB.
No,
so
I know you're not.
But I can. My view is that their view of you will be a very high-performing investment. That your ROI would be greater than a number of other events they will be funding at a regional level currently. You're on a traditional funding regime that MB Major Events Fund has of a decreasing investment, and you have more than met your accountability responsibilities by levelling it back up and securing the revenues required to meet their requirements. So you're achieving all their KPIs. However, the reality is they are facing the same considerations as everybody is now about what support they lend and where they invest their resources going forward. I think an important note is that the Major Events Fund is very well set up for shorter term or one-off event scenarios, not for long-term annualised properties such as this. And one of the things that I'm strongly recommending they consider is new criteria as it applies to annualised events of this nature. And I know that's currently under consideration. So my sense would be these are difficult times, but you would be very well placed for consideration by MB for ongoing investment.
And just a supplementary question on that, when we're all looking at the sustainability and we're tourism sits in the future, and I'm very involved there. We're looking at the smoothing of the economic future for major events in future, and the Minister's just announced some more funding. Is that another avenue that Grantworks or mountain bike events could go to, in your
I'm not
view?
sure yet, Madam Mayor, until I haven't reviewed the criteria. I do know, we're wearing my other hats, we're having frequent conversations around that space. My view is that that no government in its right mind, and this one is doing a good job at the moment, is going to not invest in those initiatives that it has invested already considerably in. It's not going to let them fall over.
Thank you.
So, this event there's no risk of this event falling over. It's very sound and very solid. It's just that it needs to be, it's got obligations through this licence for another few years. And what we need to make sure is that all the investment to date is leveraged and built on. And I think that's the reason why this event will sit very well in consideration for additional investment to achieve that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any more comments? Because I think I think your Sharon's report has given us, identified some areas that obviously there has to be some work done, and I think that's really for us. So it isn't in the, I'm going to allow some questions of Sharon, but basically it's really the report is for us and to consider, but there's been some excellent, actually some excellent areas of actions in the future that we need to tackle. But I will take some questions. Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Chair. I've got two questions for you, ma'am. I much appreciate your report. The first question is about your knowledge of New Zealand Major Events Fund. How likely are allocations going to be made this year in a COVID context?
So thank you for that, Councillor McPherson. The major events, there's been a decision made already that there is some funding being set aside already for events that sit outside, that are major events that sit outside the major events fund that this is recipient of, and they are investing in those already to make sure events survive COVID. And I understand they are working through currently what their support plans will be for those events that are directly funded under the major events fund currently. So I know they are working on that. And I'm expecting for them to be making decisions around that shortly.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Through you, Chair. One other question. Economists remind us that providing public subsidies increases supply, but it distorts the market and leads to suboptimal investment outcomes. So what's your evaluation of mountain bike event strategy for renewable and sustainable private enterprise? Thank you.
Oh, well, that's a very big question. Very big question for a forum such as this. And to be honest with you, I don't feel in a position that I could really reply on that, because I don't know enough about that at this point in time. All I can say to you is that from the work that I have reviewed, I am very confident in this event delivering very sustainable and long-term benefit to the Rotorua community based on performance to date and the opportunities that it's leaning into. And the growth that you've seen already through your own reports and the reports that I've reviewed of your own economic assessment locally, it looks to me that this is stacking up very strongly in that respect in terms of return on investment.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Maxwell, and I think that'll be, yes, Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you. Kia ora, Sharon. I don't know if you remember me. We worked together on a big promotion in Sydney, Australia, prior to hosting.
I do. Nice to. It's the voice, it's not the face, sir. Sorry, it's the voice.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, that was prior. That was prior to the Rugby World Cup coming to New Zealand.
Correct.
I want to say thank you for an excellent independent assessment. The question I have is touched on what you said in your presentation, the event being very vulnerable, relying on passionate volunteers like our Deputy Mayor Dave Donaldson, that it would have a substantial negative impact if event not held. So are you saying that 2021, 2022 is what, take it easy, or just a a small one and go for the big one in 23. Is that what it meant? But hey, good to see you again. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Oh, so kia ora, Councillor. It is nice to not see you enough, but hopefully I'll be there in person soon. I think it's important to note that we're all struggling with what 21 and 22 looks like. So right now, any sensible person in these situations are running, as we are with the Olympics, we are running scenarios. And right now, all we can do is scenario plan. However, the one thing that Grantworks Rotorua has in its favour is a very, very strong domestic level of engagement and level of support, and real aspiration from around New Zealand to be involved or connected to the event. So my sense is that, and also there have been very good discussions already underway, I understand, with Grantworks International for the Rotorua event to kind of lead the way and end the way almost in 21 and 22. So my view is that those events should be planned for on the scenarios that are being anticipated currently, and I'm sure Ari or Dave can talk to those further. But I think it will be business as usual in what we are now calling the new normal from 2023 onwards, and that's certainly the basis on which most of us in the major event space are kind of scenario planning currently. You shouldn't be anticipating a smaller or less impactful event, actually. I think you'll find at a domestic level your demand is going to go nuts, and actually you'll need to be prepared for that. So as you've already noticed, you are the premier mountain biking destination in New Zealand, and with a showcase event, I think people will be even hungrier for events, and that's actually what we're seeing, and you can see that from rugby right now, with the emergence of the Rugby Aotearoa program, and in fact we've seen people racing back to an engagement because it's the one thing they can do. So I actually think, my concern for you actually, is that 21 and 22, it'll be hard to secure commercial funding because people are stretched and nervous in a business world at one level, but you're going to have extraordinary demand and attendance aspiration because it's one of the few things that people will be able to do. So I think that will be the challenge, which is the reason why I'm saying gear up your people, gear up your thinking, look to government to help through the impact of COVID on events, as it's helping all sporting events and all sporting initiatives, but also be prepared and don't underestimate the fact that you've got the potential, I think, to use that same opportunity to bring on domestic commercial and domestic broadcast partners that'll help build you up to be ready to be back to the bigger event proposition, and probably as early as 22.
Thank you. Thank you, Sharon. Sharon, before you go, I am going to invite Councillor Donaldson to actually, I am Dave, because I think this is actually your work, a result of your hard work, and we are well aware of the times that the time that you've had to put in trying to counter the opposition. So I don't think that can be underestimated. But I'd like you to perhaps have an opportunity just to give your comments to Sharon as well. I think that's really important.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I appreciate your kind words, but the real heroes of this event sit up the back. Sharon has been very, very thorough in her work. That's all I can say. And that's included interviews internationally as well as right throughout New Zealand. And so the board certainly appreciates her work. She did get down to Rotorua before Auckland was locked up and had a workshop with the board. And really appreciate the fact that technology brings her into the room today to give an independent view to elected members of what this is all about. I don't want to say any more or colour anyone's judgment. It's been my privilege to be part of this event for the past 6 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. JP, is there anything else you'd like to add to? Well, look, no, thank you. Look, thank you so much, Sharon, for the report, for the work that you've put in, and yes, we'd like to think that someday that you will come while Grantworks is on and share in the fun and the vitality and everything that goes with it. But thank you very much indeed for being with us via Zoom this morning.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and rest assured I will be there with a number of my girlfriends with bells on. I look forward to Grantworks Rotorua. I intend to be a great consumer of domestic tourism, and you're on top of my list. I thank you for the privilege of speaking, and my sincere apologies for not being able to be there in person. I'm disappointed, but I'm thinking of you all. Please stay safe and well, and thank you. Ka kite.
Thank you. Kia ora. Thank you. I'll just wait until that comes down. Look, I just heard, thank you. Look, councillors, I just heard Councillor Donaldson say something that I just wanted to comment on. And you did refer, Dave, when I said that, you know, the mahi that you'd put in, and you did mention that the mountain bikers and some of them in the room who had put the hard yards in. But it's actually true, Dave, that if there's nobody sitting at the table who has the vision to be able to convince fellow councillors that this is the way we should go on certain things, it won't happen. So that's really what you did, and you held that line over many, many years. So thank you for that. What a great report. So we'll move now to recommendation 7.1, the Grantworks event funding application. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please, to receive this report? Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Thank you, Your Worship. That the report Grantworks event funding application be received. I'll put that motion. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you, carry. Thank you. JP, thank you. And Andrew.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, Andrew and I will just tag team through this presentation, and really for us now we come back to the recommendation as council officers to you about the funding level we provide to the Grantworks event and Mountain Bike Events Limited to run that event. So really focusing in on the recommendations we have for you. You can see there, probably the key one is to lift our current level of funding as per some of those comments from Sharon and her recommendations about the level of public funding from the approximately 150,000 we've provided for a number of years to a new level of 250,000. We're proposing to use the Economic Recovery Fund that straddles this financial year and next financial year to absorb that increase initially. However, we're also looking at saying, well, we need to build into our long-term plan adequate funding right out to 2027. And again, you heard Sharon make that comment that we should be cementing that level of support through to the termination of or to the end of the current licence, which is 2027. So this presentation really tries to highlight some of those other issues outside of the event that Sharon alluded to, which was the significant importance of the event as a showpiece for us as a destination, to drive visitor arrivals and our brand identity, but also to support that ecosystem of businesses directly and also indirectly. So we've got some references to some of that information more widely for you. So, councillors, in the report, of course, you saw some options that were laid out for you. Now, again, picking up very carefully on Sharon's assessment there, her view was if we were to continue with the same level of public funding, there is a sustainability issue for the event moving forward. So as far as an impact is concerned, and paraphrasing the first one, why don't we leave the level of funding at the same level? There would be significant risk to the event moving forward. It would either have to be resized, or we would see a gradual deterioration in the support and the ability to successfully deliver a high value event. So that's a gradual erosion of the event sustainability. If we took the other option, which is to say, actually the event needs to stand on its own 2 feet, you've heard from Sharon very clearly that all major events do not stand on their own 2 feet. They need a level of public support through government agencies or public bodies, which recognises the value that they create as a marketing tool and as a destination promotion tool. So if there was no funding going forward, then the event is likely to cease. It would just be totally unsustainable. So that's the option 3, which is to put no further funding. So as you can see there, our recommended action was to increase that funding right through to 2027. So if I just go to that investment rationale, so between Andrew and I, you've heard, and it was highlighted in the report, and of course Sharon has mentioned it as well, that assessed economic value from each of those events that run annually, and obviously the cumulative impact since 2015. We've also referenced in the report, if you recall, we did a value of mountain biking report back in 2018. Some of the numbers have been updated, but the report hasn't been finalised for 2020, but I'll make reference to some of the numbers later on. So again, the economic value that was identified in that 2018 report for our wider economy was between 26 and 43 million. The other piece that's been important across the event is that we've had 2 contract relationships with MB, so that question about continuity and the likelihood of MB continuing to support it as a major event is high. So we're coming to the end of the most recent 5-year agreement with MB, but through that agreement we've leveraged 1.74 million from MB. So that just gives you a feel for the level of funding. So initially the agreement had been for 3 years, which was the initial contract term. When that licence, I should say, when the licence for Grantworks here was extended to 2027, a new 5-year agreement was entered into with MB and it was extended. So we'll talk a bit more about that wider economic growth and development around mountain biking and the significant number of jobs related to it across our economy. And obviously also with the amount of investment that we're making in partnership with our iwi partners in the forest projects, it also complements other pieces of work that we're doing to support our domestic value for tourism. Sharon took some time and it really highlights Rotorua's place on the world stage and as an iconic destination for mountain biking. And obviously that creates a value for that ecosystem that's built around mountain biking here in Rotorua. She also highlighted the significant value and I think she highlighted the outstanding nature of the event to actually touch on the social and cultural aspects which other events often miss or don't necessarily realise. So if we talk about a pre-COVID world and obviously then think about what's happening post-lockdown and hopefully anticipating a COVID-free world going forward. This is some of those numbers. Now, in the original 2018 mountain biking report that I referred to, the breakdown of, and we've taken one specific location, so this is one entry point into the forest, which is the Waipa car park. There's been growth since 2018 through to 2020 of approximately 40% or 39% growth in the numbers of mountain bikers that are accessing the forest through that car park. So that steady increase that many people see in the forest, but equally it's the steady increase in the number of cars you see around town or driving to and from Rotorua with bike racks on the back carrying bikes. So that's a really important part of the growth and of us as a domestic destination. So that's some of the hard numbers. Now, one of the comments that we often hear is tourism and the domestic tourism has been significantly impacted. So what has happened post-lockdown? So this is looking at the number of days. So we've taken a period from when we moved to level 1 and compared it to last year. So you can see that New Zealanders staying home and visiting destinations locally, but also enjoying the chance to come out and enjoy the unique assets that we have as a community and as an Upper and North Island has seen a growth in the equivalent period last year of 50%. So again, this is out of that Waipa location. So significant growth there. Just by way of checking in as to the composition of some of those people who are accessing the forest from that car park, there's the graph to your right just highlights, so where have these people come from? And so you can see there that the people using the Waipa car park to access the forest, 45% were day visitors from outside of the district and 45% were overnight visitors from outside of the district. Now, the locals percent there of 10% probably understates how many locals access the forest. They generally don't go to the Waipa car park. That seems to, that's our visitor car park for access to the forest. So that has been done over the last couple of weekends, that survey, just to give you a flavour for where our visitation is coming from. So the forest is a strong attractor of visits to Rotorua. So we talk about that ecosystem that surrounds mountain biking and the number of businesses. So these are some of the logos of those that you would expect to see. These are the direct businesses. So they're either bike businesses, they're trail building businesses, or actually there's specialist services related to the high end of the mountain biking industry, like the suspension lab. So those are the ones that people would normally associate with the value of mountain biking, and for us, seeing that value of Grantworks as a showpiece for us as a destination in that space. So, but what we've done here is also just picked up some other information, and I might just hand over to Andrew probably to click through some of these ones, because it really highlights that there's a wider business ecosystem that sees the real value of mountain biking to our domestic visitation, but also how Grantworks fits within that scenario.
Thanks, JP. Certainly, we've got a bunch of slides here that are just with some snippets of information from some of the next layer of businesses that see certainly benefit to their own businesses or trade from the kind of halo effect that Grantworks delivers. So unsurprisingly, a number of the real estate agents, professionals amongst them, do report quite strong interest in local property as a result of buyers being attracted to the mountain biking that they were introduced to through Grantworks. Again, this is a little local IT company based just in the middle of Rotorua, which Grantworks here led to them securing a contract to build an app for the Canadian leg of the World Tour, which was launched last year up in Whistler. RTIP, so if you're not familiar with RTIP, that's the Rotorua Tourism Investment Partnership. It's basically a group of approximately 80 tourism businesses. They have certainly been a key supporter of Grantworks through its various iterations over the last few years in terms of a financial supporter. And certainly when we've talked to them recently, they are 100% in behind the event continuing and see it as certainly something which anchors that domestic market for us. Rotorua Boys High. So certainly it's been a great opportunity. So this is again one of these opportunities in terms of the social impact that the event has. The team at Grantworks do a great job in terms of making sure that they make the event available for whether it's a learning opportunity or for other outreach. Again, this is our collection of key hotels. Again, they are all significant supporters of the event. Right through, probably right from the first event, they've made rooms available in kind, and they've certainly been key supporters. I think that brings us to the close. There was just one other comment I would make that JP didn't quite touch on was Tourism New Zealand have just completed some research, probably just in the last sort of month, which did note sort of up to a third of domestic visitors travel for events or to participate in events. So I certainly wouldn't underestimate the importance of events to the destination in terms of delivering visitors.
Thank you very much. I'm sure there'll be some questions. Thank you. Thank you. Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Chair. The first question I've got goes back to the question of the increase. It's a budget variation of 67% this year. And my question is, how is that in terms of activity justified? And secondly, will it be matched by private sector beneficiaries increasing their investments?
I think what we're seeing here is, you mentioned a budget variation. I think what we're seeing here is a recognition that we've underinvested. So I would say we've been highlighted to us by an independent expert that we have grossly underfunded the event, and therefore we're appropriately resizing through this proposal the budget. The contribution from others, look, my expectation is that in us having reset and working with government to ensure a level of public funding to provide that support, we are helping to smooth what will be a challenging couple of years. And again, as Sharon highlighted, the potential investment from sponsors and other funders. So I think the ability for those to contribute directly in the short term, next 1 or 2 years, will be a challenge. But again, I think what has been highlighted here is the need for us to build the sustainability of the event and start moving it to that next level so that in a post-COVID world, it will bring in that additional support from those other investors. And again, that's about making sure the event can grow appropriately and has that strength going forward. So I would suggest that actually at the moment, there is the challenge around that COVID investment potential. I would still see that a lot of operators and a lot of investors would still see its immediate value to us and would consider it. But again, I would also say that's superimposed on a view that a lot of businesses and a lot of current sponsors do not have as much funding as they would have previously to step up their investment.
Yes, through you, Chair. I certainly agree this is a tough time for everybody. Therefore, it raises the question of the nature and extent of the underwrite. Can you explain, please, the current conditions of the underwrite?
My understanding of the underwrite is that it is to a sum of up to 500,000. So for where in the event through some sort of impact across that particular event year fails to achieve its break-even position or profit position, there is an underwrite available to the council. The original 500,000 was extended previously, so we've had the same 500,000, and the recommendation here is to continue the same level of total underwrite out to 2027. My understanding is that from the early events, so the first few years, the drawdown on it was 134,000. So the residual was about 360,000.
Thank you.
One other.
Yes?
Yes. In the light of those responses, can I suggest an amendment to the second of the recommendations?
Well, we don't have a motion on the table at present.
Then I'll defer my question until then, if that's possible. Thank you very much. Thank you, JP, and your colleague.
Your Worship?
I've been to a few board meetings out of interest, actually, as this is the icon event for Rotorua. The question of timing, and we're always trying to extend that, the shoulder, so that we extend the length of stay. Is there any possibility to do that? Because I remember us always trying to add other events into it, so that we could really stretch the length of stay that people are here and participants and visitors alike. I'm sure you've looked at it, but are there any other events circling around that we could add in?
Through the Chair. Look, I think that's certainly a question probably for Mountain Bike Events Limited in terms of the timing of the event. What we would note from the research that they do is that where they have got participants or spectators that are coming along to the event, they are staying for substantially longer than the event. So they are, sort of extending their stays either side of that. Certainly we'll find with a lot of the international visitors, they'll make this their kind of summer base. And so we do see, and it's certainly not reflected necessarily in the economic assessment that's done, which is very focused on that event period. But we do see the the extension to either side of the event quite clearly in terms of the numbers that are around town.
And I just wanted to add there that I went to a secondary school participation, which actually pressed all the buttons for me, and hope that we can keep that going and growing. I couldn't believe the number of schools participating from around New Zealand, and so when you look at the Ames Games, this is sort of like that for mountain biking. I mean, I hope that grows, as you mentioned before, about continually growing the event.
Yeah, and I think that's a key driver of the request in terms of how do we continue to make this, well, mountain bike events make this event more successful for the destination overall.
Councillor Kai Fong.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The investment rationale is based on the event going ahead as it has happened previously with a full-on event with spectators. And I know Sharon mentioned that obviously there has to be scenario planning for what might happen in a COVID world, and given that we've moved to a different level of lockdown, and we've heard that sporting events around the world are taking place without spectators, like a rugby game or an international golf tournament. So in that situation, because then we wouldn't get if we don't have an event with spectators and it's simply a broadcast event, we are not going to meet some of these sort of key KPIs that we really want to achieve. In that situation, and maybe it's a question for the event organiser rather than maybe you two, but is that another condition on whether or not the full funding or underwrite would be available?
You wouldn't help.
I suppose, again, my understanding would be Grantworks internationally is doing a lot of scenario planning, and obviously the event organisers locally will be doing a significant amount of scenario planning, and I suspect that scenario you raised would certainly be one of those that would feature fairly prominently in their minds. I would probably just answer from a council perspective. It would be very difficult for us to say, look, we're not going to provide you with the event funding or conditionally put some controls on the underwrite, when actually this is when those, the costs are up front, whether someone potentially arrives or not. They might be able to modify the offering up at Skyline if they knew in advance there wasn't going to be a public part of it and it was just as a televised event. But again, I think one of the things here is we're trying to predict a whole bunch of scenarios that they'll be thinking about, but there's likely to be financial implications, and it would be very difficult for us to tag the funding to say, hey, you can't draw down as much of the 250 because unless that was telegraphed well in advance, is actually this is the risk to the underwrite. Now, I would go further and actually say some of the risks to the event are also the weather. For a number of years, they've faced the significant risk on the particular show day they have, which was the slopestyle, that it rains and they don't get the walk-up ticket sales. So I think COVID and the challenges of a pandemic world are just another thing on top of the weather that's a risk to the event and a potential to require that drawdown of that underwrite.
Just one further question, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Can I just also be clear that the 250 isn't actually 250,000 isn't actually part of the underwrite? Thank you.
Just a question around employment. So I think Sharon mentioned that some greater measures were needed for employment. So how can we make sure that we add further jobs that are actually going to endure, not just for the lead up or for the event, that we're actually creating jobs long term for Rotorua, and that creates additional value by new jobs as well as supporting existing businesses. So I just want a bit of a more fleshed out, I suppose, explanation about the job creation opportunities.
I think one of the things that Sharon highlighted is that we have done it with less resources and therefore more goodwill than should actually be applied to an event of this scale and size. I think she said 2 when she would have expected there likely to be 5. I think that gives us the chance to highlight with them, and certainly for them to reflect on Sharon's recommendations, and potentially with that additional funding about, so what are they doing in that training and development space to broaden that skill base and that wider employment space directly within the events. Now that's a bunch of skills which are highly valuable to individuals. So there is a huge opportunity there, and I think Sharon highlighting that we're an exemplar event gives the chance there for that development to occur with one of the best. Andrew might also add to that sort of that wider aspect of it as well.
Through the chair, so certainly the number that you see that's associated with the economic impact of the event in terms of, I think it was reported at 4.3 or therefore, does equate to real jobs. I mean, that's money that is circulating through the economy. If you talk to an economist, they'll give you a multiplier that'll turn it into a job number, which, while not precise, will give you an indication of the level of employment that's associated with that event in the broader economy. I think the thing we'd note is that I wouldn't underestimate the importance of the event in terms of the profile it gives us year-round for visitors for mountain biking purposes, and therefore, the jobs that kind of spills over into, whether it's accommodation, hospitality, other tourism businesses. I think from Sharon's recommendation, we need to do a better job of articulating that and measuring it. I think it's already there. It's just that we need to be able to articulate that in a far more sort of clear fashion.
And can I just add that social return, social return isn't just about employment. It's about well-being. It's about social connectedness. It's about social cohesion. All of those, and they are very measurable too. So I'm just saying it's not just employment, and it's that seems to be the big measure. Before I take, sorry, you wanted to make a comment.
Thank you, through the chair, and I might actually ask Thomas to also respond to this as well. JP alluded to the provisions of the underwrite earlier on. The underwrite, as I understand it, is $500,000 basically underwrite available to this event should it actually so require. The proposal in level 3 is to actually provide extend those provisions out to 26-27. I think the way that the question was answered was that the underwrite would be reduced for that period given the cool down that had already happened to date. The proposal in 3 is to extend that underwrite at $500,000 for that 26-27 extension.
Question, is that proportionate by year, or is it a flat 500,000 available in each of the years of the extension?
It would be an underwrite available to that $500,000 loss in any year, that's right.
Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Kumar?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your report. Thank you, Andrew. You probably would have got more attention for Rotorua than you wanted this week. But they say any publicity is good publicity, and hopefully it will not adversely affect us this summer coming for domestic tourism. Look, thank you very much for your presentation, and I have to say, you have to take your hats down to Dave for his contribution, and also to mountain biking for what they do for Rotorua. I may have supported this in the past, but I am a little pragmatic at the moment with the pandemic and COVID and going future. I have a couple of questions. One question is, where is the money coming from? If I can be convinced that the money coming is good money, going to a good purpose for the rest of Rotorua, I will support it. And my other question is, we've seen a great visible presentation, 38 pages. We've seen Sharon's good presentation, almost bordering both. It was quite well balanced. She did tell us the downside of funding as well. So I ask a very simple question, is that if the product is so good, it's got so many backers, it's got so many sponsors, so many people writing wonderful things about it, How come yet we don't have a very tangible sponsor for it yet? It is great that the council can still underwrite it and support it for the future. And my last question is, what is Grantworks doing for the disability sector as well? Thank you.
I'll try and work through your questions there, Councillor.
Yes, I think when we ask questions, Councillor, if you could just put the first one and then leave time for answer and then move to the second. Thank you.
Covering off the last one first, so from an accessibility perspective, they have added a number of events for people with disabilities over the last year. So certainly I think there was some imagery floating around probably in one of the presentations you received that does highlight the some additional races and so forth that have been included. So that has certainly been a focus of the event. In terms of the named sponsor, the event does have a named sponsor at a global level, which is SRAM. So certainly there's no shortage of sponsorship kind of associated with the event at both a global and a local level. Your question that kind of led into that, which was around the need for investment, I think as Sharon articulated, there's not a major event in this country which doesn't survive with some degree of government funding, and that certainly reflects the fact that these major events are a key kind of drivers for economic, social inclusion, as the chair has pointed out, for a community, and so that's really the payback that you're looking to buy from the investment that's made from around this table.
And where's the money coming from? That was the other question. The recovery fund.
Councillors, yes, you will be aware that through the annual plan you'd set aside 29 million for economic recovery projects over the next 2 years. So this certainly over those 2 years where that funding has been committed, it would come from that. What I'm suggesting, is that we would have to make then a provision if you agree to fund this out to 2027, which was the recommendation of Sharon, was that you include it properly within the long-term plan moving forward. So that's a process that obviously you're starting now with a view of signing off the next 10 years of a long-term plan next June. So this gives that continuity and that certainty. And I think what we do there is we also demonstrate to MB our commitment locally to the event, and a hugely important and successful event, and certainly encourages them to enter into in effect a third round of funding themselves to this event. So as I said, there was an initial agreement for across the first licence period. When that was extended, they also put forward another agreement for a further 5 years. So their funding on this current tranche runs out next year. So as I say, this latest agreement was for 1.74 million.
Jeff, do you want to say? Thank you, Jeff. Thank you.
If I can just further clarify, I think the key point that's being made is that this is actually providing an adequate funding level from council for this event to ensure sustainability. And I just need to go back to the underwrite. The underwrite technically is for the duration of the licence period. So that 500,000 is available over the duration of that licence period. If it is called in any 1 year, the expectation would be that we work with MBIE as to understand the nature of the need for that and determine how that would be treated in out years.
Thank you for that further explanation, Jeff. Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've got two questions and a comment through you. My first question is, if we don't show sufficient support for Grantworks through funding, would that, we've talked about how we're linking our funding to MB supporting them. If the corollary of that, if we don't support them, would that affect their likelihood of funding from MB and especially from other third-party groups and enterprises around Rotorua?
Yeah, certainly MB would be looking for a contribution to be made locally, would be the advice that we have, and that's certainly consistent with most of the MB funds that are made available. I couldn't comment on other third-party funders available locally.
Thank you. And my second question, Madam Chair. You know, we have sort of alluded to the fact that we're not sure what will happen, especially next year. We might have an event with no audience. We might have an event, as Sharon said, with an enormous audience. I'm wondering if we have no audience, we would need to provide them with this extra funding. Likewise, if we have a huge audience, we would be needing to provide them with this extra funding to allow them to cope with it. Is that kind of the rationale behind it, that no matter what happens?
Mr. Thomas, I think you're sort of asking us to look into the glass ball or the glass bowl or whatever you call it, crystal ball gazing, and I just really think that it's impossible for us or for our staff to answer that question. I know where you're going with it, but I mean it's just so difficult because we don't know what the next year is going to look like. And you want to provide some comment. It's a difficult one. I appreciate the question.
Through the Chair, and the Chair is actually quite right. It's impossible to predict the scenarios that we might be faced with in the future. But I think, though, what you can see happening around with all major events at the moment is that many of these events are going ahead regardless of audience. And the decision makers with respect to those events are looking at the value that is created by holding the event in the absence of audience, with the availability of telecasting of the event through television and social media. And their assessment at the time is clearly that the event actually accrues significant value to actually hold the event and to actually sustain the loss of not having audience in return for the value creation that is actually achieved. That process would be exactly what we would do. So in the advent of a situation that is coming up immediately before us, we would examine the situation, we would look at the potential options, which would include obviously postponement or cancellation of the event through to holding the event without an audience. All of those options would be evaluated and a decision would be made as to what would be the most appropriate way forward at that time.
And you did want to make a comment.
Yeah, and my comment was really about the non-financial aspects of this. And I've just got to say that over the last 6 years, the amount of local participation and enthusiasm has always overwhelmed me. And even out in my rural areas, the number of kids who are coming along to watch and to engage. And I've been privileged to help judge our Young Achiever Awards over a number of years. And pretty well every school student who's putting in for those awards has on their resume that they have volunteered at Grantworks. And when they talk about it, they talk about the experiences from that and what they've learned and how it has helped them develop as people. So I think those non-financial aspects of Grantworks for our local population are as great as any financial contribution it makes to our economy.
Look, thank you very much for that, Mr. Thomas, for reminding us about, there are young people out there who it made a difference. And it's just good of them. Thank you for reminding us about that. Some of those young people are from our rather underprivileged homes as well. So it's a big point too. Miss Councillor Bentley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I commend the MBIE for the work they have done to date. However, I've spoken with some previous councillors that when Grantworks first started off, and as I understand it, or their understanding was at the time, that they underwrote this event, that given time, maybe 3 or 4 years, they would start to show a return and reimburse council with some of the funds that we're putting towards it. Do we get to see the books on this?
Well, we do get a report every year, an annual report. So I'll just, yes. Well, thank you,
I'll
Thomas.
just hand over to Thomas because, as I say, we are a shareholder in Mountain Biking Events Limited, so Thomas is our representative within that space.
Yep, so thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. Again, just a reminder, we are a 49% shareholder. As part of the agreement, there are requirements on the level of reporting that is provided through to Council. I myself, on behalf of Council, attend the majority of the board meetings where the budgets and the financials are discussed. Up until previously, our internal finance team was actually preparing the financial reports and the budgets for the organisation. Unfortunately, that staff member left and has continued to do it on our behalf, but I have full visibility into the financials. So at any time, can I ask and have access to the financials at any time? Just a reminder as well on the underwrite, it keeps coming up with regards to the drawdown. You will recall in the first few years that some rain events, and as the event developed, there was a draw on those events. Post that, the event was generating a couple of small surpluses, and then I think in 2019 a more larger one, and it was offered to pay that underwrite back. What we elected to do as an organisation was, because as it was paid back and the cyclical nature of the funding, it made no sense for them to pay the underwrite back and then for us to advance and draw on the underwrite again while they were preparing for the event. So we have left the funds in. But from a technical perspective, the underwrite has been cleared. And so at any time we can ask for those funds to be returned, but we have elected as an organisation to leave them into the event as working capital for future events. So just to clarify the actual state of where that underwrite is.
And Madam Chair, can I just, there was one other thing that I was just corrected on too, which was actually the provision of the underwrite was actually a condition of funding from MB. So yes. It did require that Council actively have an underwrite provision available for those events like the weather, which may have disrupted a particular year's event.
And just as a comment then, Madam Chair, I'm comfortable with 150 going forward, but I don't think that we can go to our ratepayers at the moment and increase year on year this additional $100,000. I think that's a pretty hard sell.
Well, I suspect, Councillor Bentley, had the ratepayers seen their report this morning, they would have asked us to continue our commitment, because the ratepayers do benefit from this. Sorry, we are in a question
period. Thank you, Madam Chair. That is your opinion.
Yes, thank you. Did you have a further question? Thank you. Mrs. Trumper, and then Councillor Tapsell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, I think what everybody's forgetting about is the really big picture, and it's the $4.5 million that comes into our city. And I've worked out, very briefly with my maths, it's $3.50 per per resident that you're actually seeking. So my question, though, is around 21-22 periods, is 250 enough to be able to manage the event with the significance of potential pull-out of commercial sponsors? And I think as a city, we owe it to our residents and the people that are putting these events on to give them every support that we can actually throw at them.
Thank you, Mrs. Trumper. And Your Worship. Oh, you weren't expecting one. No, did you? Oh, was that a question?
The question was, is 250 enough for 21-22?
Go you.
Madam Chair, look, I think Sharon's presentation said there is pressure on sponsorship and funding. What has been proposed is a view of a new base sustainable level of funding in a longer term perspective. And I think we've talked about, we don't know what next year looks like. We don't know what the damage of COVID, though she did give us a steer that don't expect to be as successful with sponsorship as many events are facing that challenge. Now, The flip side of that is there is also other government funding that may see an injection coming in to do that. But I think that's what we see as the potential there, is that it is the MB funding bridging that, or the additional sort of COVID-related support for current events there. So my question is, we've kind of left that for the Mountain Bike Events Limited to work specifically with MB and the government about whether there's any additional funding support through that bridge of the COVID-related impacts. For us, we were taking a long-term view of our recommendation. So I think you've highlighted a particular risk that exists, and I suppose our backstop of that is that underwrite that continues in that space.
Thank you. Oh, sorry,
Supplementary question
yes,
to that. So then for these 2 years, these 2 critical years where we look at the new normal in 2023, is there potential to ask Council now for, say, 300,000 for the 2 years? I mean, they're only going to be utilising what they require, but it just gives certainty around the event is what I would have been thinking.
Your Worship, that's a different recommendation from the one we've put forward, and I think that's you've seen Sharon's presentation where she's highlighted those risks, so you have asked a really relevant question for Council. But as I say, we've seen that as being we've put forward a recommendation from the wider view, and the underwrite has that opportunity. But your choice is elected body.
Thank you.
Through the chair, if I can just add a little bit there. I think your first question was, is this level of funding adequate? And the answer is no. Because if the answer was yes, then there would be no application being made through to MB for the Major Events Fund. So the success of Grantworks will depend on the success of the application to the Event Fund to achieve an adequate level of funding. My suggestion would be that until we are informed as to the success or not of that application, Council would be wise to actually look at the recommended level of funding at this point in time, and then to review that given any decision from government as to additional funding availability.
Thank you, Jeff. I have Councillor Tapsell, then Your Worship, and then Councillor McPherson. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you. Thank you, JP, for your presentation. Look, when Grantworks first landed on this table, I was a critic. I was uncertain about the return on investment for our ratepayers' money, and quite frankly, I was uncertain about the affordability for families. But every single year that I walked through those gates of Grantworks, and I saw the proud locals, I saw the committed volunteers, and I saw the excited visitors, and I actually felt very sorry for ever criticising or having any doubts in this event, because quite clearly, as we've heard this morning, Grantworks is now sector leading, and it's outperforming the majority of events in New Zealand and internationally. So to provide or to hear any criticism that $250,000 may not be a responsible investment of money when we quite regularly are getting multi-millions of dollars, and not only economic but social and cultural benefits. I am sorry to the organisers for that, because they've done an absolutely incredible job. Now, Council, we're here to support our community on a rainy day, and we know that it's going to pour with this economic impact of COVID-19. So I'm more than happy to be supporting this, and I want to ensure that Council can continue to support it in the long term. So my questions for you this morning are just, can we ensure that the performance measures through that separate panel group that'll be set up can actually be targeted towards just a domestic focus? Because I think that Grantworks Aotearoa is actually a really exciting opportunity where all those kids in our community who never thought about mountain biking but now own and enjoy mountain biking can actually have a chance at being world champions themselves. And the second question is just around the long-term plan and ensuring that we can adequately budget and fund the Grantworks event going in future. And so will this come from events funding, or would it actually be able to be put into sports and recreation as a daily year-on-year support to our mountain biking community, but in particular to this Grantworks event?
Madam Chair, and I think what Councillor Tapsell has highlighted is the importance of that last recommendation, that we do put in place that separate funding agreement, so we're quite clear about the expectations across the year or the years that our funding is provided. It goes back also to a question Councillor Kai Fong raised, which was about the measures and the metrics which are of importance to us. So we've certainly reflected also on the feedback from Sharon and her expertise, so we certainly will be using that to help us shape those measures and that focus within that agreement, just to make sure we've got the right measures and the right measurables in place on that annual basis. So yeah, a really important piece for us was to make sure that we get that correct focus and recognising obviously what the circumstances are moving over, certainly over the next 12 or 24 months will be part of that. And I think the last question was budgeting. Look, I think the key here is that if you take a decision here and it's ratified at council, it will be budgeted in the appropriate location as ongoing funding to 2027 for Grantworks.
Thank you. Your Worship?
Madam Chair, I don't have any questions, but I wish to signal that I move 2, 3, 4 and 5.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Councillor McPherson has... Oh, thank you. So who do we... the Mayor and Councillor Maxwell. So it's been moved and seconded. Councillor McPherson.
I've got 2 questions now. Does that preempt the possibility of amendment?
You can make an amendment.
Splendid. Do I do it now? I'd like, if I could, just to go back for another source of possible information from Mr. Colley. Is that possible?
Well, yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Yeah, and I want to acknowledge the work, as others have done, of those that have promoted this event over many, many years, and many of the arguments that Councillor Tapsell put forward, I thoroughly appreciate. But I'm in this particular moment, I'm looking for any sources of data that would help me, on behalf of residents and ratepayers, estimate risks. And since Mr. Colley provides oversight of the books on behalf of us councillors, I wanted to ask, is he aware of the justification for this year's proposed budget variation of $100,000? Thank you. If I can come back to the question of the amendment after that.
Yes, thank you.
I think, councillors, I would refer you to Sharon's presentation before this meeting and the presentation that you've just had, which provides you with more than adequate justification, I would have thought, for the rationale for the increase in funding.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
That doesn't add anything. My proposed amendment would be that item number 2, recommendation number 2, is split into 2 separate recommendations. That is, we deal with the question of the $100,000 for this financial year, and quite separately, the ongoing funding contribution to the long-term plan in coming years. The reason, you wish a reason for...
Yes, thank you. Yes. I want to hear that, because... No, I know there is a mover and a seconder, that's fine, but you do have every right to put an amendment, but that would then have to require the mover and the seconder to agree with that so it can be put.
So you'd like to hear my rationale for splitting those 2?
Yes, please.
Yes, please. Fine. The first part of the motion calls for a budget variation to the subsidy to Grantworks in a context where council's revenues are reducing. We understand that. Many of our people are suffering from unemployment and business failures due to COVID-19, and there's no absolute surety at all that MB is going to come through and support major events. So that is a decision we have to make in that context. Quite separately, the second part of the motion calls for a subsidy to be allocated outside of the long-term planning processes and criteria which council uses to adjudicate competing priorities fairly and wisely. So my suggestion is we disaggregate into those 2 separate motions, those 2 separate recommendations. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, just by taking a pause. Thank you.
Did he write it?
I'm not sure if the original mover and the seconder got that. I just couldn't get.
Madam Chair.
Thank you, yes.
Madam Chair, I don't support.
You heard the rationale for that.
I heard the rationale. I don't support, and I would say that we did put aside that 29 million, which was about Build Back Better, and this is showing that it's better every year. And I also heard very clearly from council officers that we'd consider the long-term plan funding implications. So I don't support that at all. And
and you heard the rationale too for the amendment. Fine. Well, then I won't accept the amendment, Councillor McPherson. Thank you. Right. Look, Oh, sorry, Your Worship.
I just wish to speak
yes, certainly.
As the mover of 2, 3, 4 and 5. And I want to firstly congratulate mountain bike events. This is a different conversation altogether than 5 years ago, when we were jittery about this, because it was amongst a whole basket of other events that were going on in our district. And I also think we need to hold, as other councillors have said, we've got to be very cautious about an unknown future. But I am leading a group that is looking at this unknown future and saying we've got to be confident about what we know works. And we've got to use what we know works to actually smooth the pathway for tourism for the whole country. And this is one event, and it's spoken for itself with Sharon's analysis this morning and presentation. This is one event that I think all of us really now are very proud of. The thing for us as a council, and we always talk about the four well-beings, they're why we're here, for our community. And this ticks every single box. And we see it in every way. We see it with families moving here to invest here, and they say, because of that, the mountain biking, and my own included, and many others around the table. We see it in the real estate market. We see it in diverse investment, which we've called for in our funding support to Rotorua economic development. Look at diverse investment as part of what we're all about here. So this is, we're seeing with the sponsorship, there's the diverse investment. Those businesses that are coming here and setting up that indirectly and directly support this incredible event. I would say 6 years ago, we didn't have a clue about the future really. We had a bunch of mountain bike enthusiasts that were cutting tracks in our forest, luckily having access to that estate that we never forget. And now it's grown into a world event. One aspect that I think Sharon pointed to, and I was looking for that sponsorship from television, because we're always annoyed every year that we get this huge reach internationally on social media, and yet we get tiny little snippets on television. So I'd caution national media and television to actually look at more support also for this iconic event. I think it's fantastic. I like the scrutiny. I think it's been good for us to question, is this the right structure of our underwrite and our commitment? And I'm very confident because of the link with MB. You can't have one without the other. And that was made very clear, while we also try to attract sponsorship. So I'm very proud to support 2, 3, 4 and 5, and we'll be voting in favour.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Your Worship. We have had a mover and a seconder, Trevor, Councillor Maxwell. And just before I put that vote, oh, yes, you can. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I wanted to speak to the motion. And one is, I was really, I knew of Sharon's credentials and that from the past and I have every confidence And in the presentation she's given us, I hope we can get a copy of what she presented as well. You know, I think of our community, how fortunate we are during these very challenging times. The government and the Progressive Provincial Fund, they've given millions of dollars to this community. And here we are with one of the major iconic events in the country, and we're looking at 250,000 as well as an increase of 100,000. And I commend Mrs. Trumper for even thinking that it should be an increase. And I'm thinking like that as well, but we're trying to be also mindful that we want to get a major support in Grantworks. And in the report, we saw where it has had substantial growth over 6 years and said it was a strong product. Over 6 years now, and unfortunately, I think for them, they have to keep coming here each year to go through this part with us. But hey, that's democracy, and I've supported each year, and I'm going to support it again. Not trying to be too critical, but how can anyone ignore supporting when we have underinvested over many, many years now? I think of even other events like the marathon. That's still going to go ahead here in Rotorua, and that's end of September. At the moment, with the borders closed and tourism can't come in, it's actually local New Zealanders, and we were told there were a third of the countries, somehow our visitors are coming to us, and I think that's great. The social and cultural impact on our community is huge. Also, I'd also like to add that other parts of New Zealand would give their eye teeth to have this event. They'd love to host and invest, and maybe even invest more than we are investing now. But, so, Madam Chair, thank you. I strongly support 2, 3, 4 and 5. Kia ora.
Thank you, Councillor Noel. I mean, the reality is that Grantworks became an event in our city because some people had the audacity to dare to dream. And there were councillors that sat around the table, and even though they were unsure, they backed it. And $43 million annually comes into our community as a result of that event. So we have had a mover, we had a seconder, and thank you so much for the discussion this morning, Your Worship and councillors. I am going to now put 2, 3, 4 and 5. Number 2, that the committee recommends to council to an increase of $100,000 for the 2020-21 financial year and an ongoing funding contribution in the next long-term plan of $250,000 for the years 2022 to 2027. 3, that the committee recommends to council to extend the current provisions of the underwrite to align with the funding allocation, extending this out to 2026-27. 4, that the committee note that the council's ongoing funding is conditional on Mountain Bike Events Limited continuing to receive funds from the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, MB, New Zealand Major Events Fund. 5, that the committee note that the Rotorua Lakes Council investment will be governed by a separate funding agreement which sets out agreed performance measures, governance and reporting requirements which are reviewed annually. We have had a mover and a seconder. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary? Thank you. Thank you. We'll call... Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Maxwell. So all those in favour, would you please raise your right hand? Thank you. And so against, please. Thank you. With two against, which is Councillor Bensley and Councillor McPherson. Thank you. So that is carried. Thank you very much, councillors. Look, I'd like us to take a break now, and perhaps if we could limit our break to 10 minutes and be back at just after 25 to. Thank you.
we have been gifted the name Te Rako Tupakari. And the meaning of that is around the unwavering tree. So our Te Amorangi unit have supported this name being given, and looking at how the fund helps make a tree sturdy and the community sturdy despite the storm. And again, looking at that community resilience and the title of that, Sport New Zealand has come up with a community resilience fund. And Ministry of Social Development have also come up with a community capability and resilience fund in the past few days. So we're just localizing our fund and ensuring that we're giving it a name that means something for Rotorua. So just taking us back to where this has started, yourselves during the annual plan looked at investing in recovery, and this is a specific focus on our community sector, where the decision being made that a $1 million one-off fund would be provided to the community sector as a response to COVID-19. So we needed to understand the need that the community sector was experiencing, medium to long term. So just a definition, when we're saying the community sector, we're including sport and recreation, kaupapa Māori, the social sector and the arts and culture sector, and how they have been impacted by COVID-19. So collaboratively, we sat down with some of our partners, Council, DIA, Rotorua Trust, and Te Aroa, and we came up with the Rotorua Community and Iwi Sector Questionnaire. The questionnaire went out to a number of organizations, and basically what we were trying to find out was around the impact, how organizations were communicating, getting information, how they were stead with their funding, how they were specifically impacted, how their funding was specifically impacted by COVID, and how they saw themselves moving forward. So the questionnaire went out to 584 organizations and community groups. We received 165 responses. And we had, of those, 10 organizations that identified with more than one. So they may have identified with kaupapa Māori and the social sector. So here's just a breakdown of the response rate. The social sector had the largest response, but still a fairly good response rate for a community questionnaire. So the responses we got were from they were cricket and rugby and netball to marae, runanga. We had various community bands and different community groups come back to us with feedback. So some of the interesting points around their normal sources of funding. The social sector and kaupapa Māori rely more on contracts, government contracts. Where when you're looking at sport and recreation, there was a much higher reliance on membership fees. Also with gaming trusts, so there was a higher representation there around the funding that they received from gaming trusts. Some of the other sources of funding came in as other, and examples were around interest dividends, some talking about they got funding from their bar. Actually, there was quite a few that came back by saying that we have funding that comes in from hosting events and that sort of thing. So you can already see that there will be impacts from COVID-19 and those activities not happening. So looking at how COVID has impacted the funding of those different sectors, as an example, sport and recreation looked to be the highest impacted around the funding. And again, if you consider membership fees and gaming funding being their core sources of funding, as well as event fees, then they are showing a 59% impact around significantly reduced funding. Arts and culture are experiencing a similar trend. Kaupapa Māori organizations may have been affected a little bit different by their investment portfolios, but social and kaupapa Māori sectors also saw a higher increase in funding, and that attributes to their central government contracts. We asked the community sector what their thoughts were around their future challenges, and that was really around the people and communities that they work with, and financial issues being number one, quite high, increased demand for those social services or kaupapa Māori services or any of those that were available, need to change our capacities and capabilities, reduce membership, and reduce audiences. So, you know, really looking at that financial impact that COVID-19 has had on our community and those people that would normally access services. So the top 5 priorities for the community sector going forward, we asked them to rank their top 5 priorities. They were given a wide list. Funding support ranked highest, and that was really around needing support with funding applications and just having that knowledge around how you would prepare proposals, etc. Marketing, promotion, and social media. So some of our organizations wanting support moving forward or knowing that they're going to have to do things or promote themselves in a different way. Volunteer recruitment and management ranked quite highly. So when you look at you know, I might use the CAB as an example, who have a lot of older volunteers. One of the things that the CAB has said in different domains is that some of their volunteers didn't come back because of their loss of confidence or the age of their volunteers and deciding that they weren't going to come back. But likewise, just ensuring that even when you're listening to Grantworks, that our community actually relies very heavily on that volunteer sector and community, and ensuring that those people are skilled and trained in supporting all of that wider community sector. Innovation and strategic advice and sustainable business planning. So again, just ensuring that those organizations are well placed, and being well placed potentially means that they're stronger and resilient long term. So building back better isn't just economic. And when we're looking at that, the social and well-being components, we're looking at how can we as council support the fabric that makes our community and binds our community together. How do we support them to help us build back better? So, you know, again, excuse the title around Community Resilience Fund. We have just been gifted this name, so I'll just continue on that. But the purpose of the fund is to address the medium to long-term impacts of COVID-19 on our community sector, with the aim of building social capital through a strong, innovative, resilient, and flourishing community sector that enables diverse, equitable participation for everyone. So we want to ensure that our community sector is able to adapt and respond to the needs and new opportunities that are available. When we say new opportunities, there is a variety of new funding that's available. And also there's a variety of opportunity to work in a collaborative space. And so looking at the Te Arawa COVID-19 hub being a prime example of collaborating and doing, working maybe in a different way with different partners. Support new operating models and grow capability in collaborative and innovative initiatives. So when we're looking at this fund and the response that we have received back through the questionnaire, we're not looking to support business as usual. There is other funding out there that's available for that. We're looking at how can we build a stronger and resilient community sector, and that means innovation. It means working in a different way, working collaboratively, potentially sharing spaces and doing things in a different way than they had done previously. So the outcome of the fund, again, just looking at increased community resilience and social capital. So support can take different forms. And when I'm saying that, although we would have a grants process, we would also have that opportunity to support organizations that potentially could build the capacity of our volunteer sector. We would provide grants that are meeting specific needs which support that innovation, collaboration, resilience that we've already said. Financial investment into support that'll benefit many organizations, such as capacity and capability development. Again, that volunteer sector, ensuring that they have all the training and resources needed to support the wider community. There is opportunity, again, through alongside volunteering, but through internships and redeployment. And we're really open to hearing what the community comes back at, what they give us as ideas to build the capacity of their organizations and groups. And also the fact that we have some partners, so DIA, for example, has an internship fund that's available that potentially could be leveraged with what funding we have. Provision of skills sharing mechanisms, so targeted training, development of resource kits, but also how organizations can share backroom functions, how they can share IT capital items and work together potentially in a hub format that they may not work in now. I suppose the other thing is that some of the learnings from these community organizations is that now that they've been forced to work with that Zoom in the Zoom realm, a number of our organizations have said that they are willing and capable and able to work from home now, when previously they were looking for office space. And that means that for some of those organizations that are having to readjust their budgets, that those are some savings for them. So just decision-making around the fund and looking at the principles, really it would look like an expedited process from what we currently have, trying to ensure that we have a quick turnaround and are able to support the organizations as their needs are arising. So staff would assess applications fortnightly. Recommendations to the panel would include a representative of each of the rural and lakes community boards, Te Tato o Te Arawa board, and one councillor, and looking at having payments within 1 month of the decision. So really trying to be proactive in responding to the needs of the community. So with the paper before you, we have put some recommendations forward around the process and the policy required to deliver the fund. We have an existing community investment funding policy, and what we are proposing is that this is an amendment to that existing policy, that this is an additional fund that fits within there, and that this fits into the framework of how we provide our existing community funding. Thank you.
Yes, Rosemary.
If I could just add to Jill's discussion, I think it's really important to realise that Council's not the only funder in our community. There are actually a number of other philanthropic funders, and we've established a regular meeting with those funders so that we actually share information and avoid duplication and gaps. And really try and have good practice in that philanthropic sector around how do you fund community groups to be strong, and how do we share information, and sometimes fund collaboratively if somebody puts in an application for something that is not something we'd support, but we know where to direct them for someone who will, and vice versa. How do we actually work together to get the best outcomes for the community? So that's very much a part going forward, acknowledging there's quite a lot of money out there for applications, and often it's different tick boxes for different organisations, but we're trying to make sure we have a good understanding of that sector.
Rosemary, can I just ask you, you've just mentioned that there are a number of funders out there in the community, plus what the government's doing as well. So how will you keep up the contact with those funders just to prevent possibly double dipping, or does it matter if it's double dipping? Because if they do need more than what this fund can give them, then there may be the necessity to go elsewhere. So are you going to be talking to the other funders to see about how you can work collaboratively in that space?
Definitely. So we've been meeting with Rotorua Trust, Bay Trust, and Geyser Community Foundation, and also connecting with MSD and DIA. So all of those groups have different community funds, slightly different purposes. I don't think it's so much double dipping. Sometimes an applicant has to apply to multiple different places to piece it all together, and it's probably not a very good use of their time either. If as funders we can come together and say, hey, I've got an application for so-and-so for this, we can support that, but are you interested in this bit? There may be some ways we can smooth that and make it easier, fewer applications, and just make it a lot easier for the sector to get good results.
Yes, and thank you for the presentation. Your Worship.
Thank you, and it's great to see this Resilience Fund coming forward quite quickly, actually. So thanks for all the work, and also great response, really, to the questionnaire. And my question's one of balance in the decisions. I know with other funding and central government funding, you always had to be careful you didn't give too much to sport and recreation at the expense of heritage or arts and culture, or, you know, it was always a balancing. How are we going to ensure that our distribution is well balanced? You had different funders, when you got the responses, there were quite different responses who all sort of know about it and apply for it. But for us, I'd want to see balanced decisions made. And how will we see that back at Council?
Through you, Madam Chair. Our current policy, so the amended policy states that if other government funding is available, that we would direct them, or that we can leverage funding for the organisation. I think, so Sport New Zealand has a few pockets of funding that are open at the moment, and those are being run through Sport Bay of Plenty. We have Ministry of Social Development who have just announced their funding, and we have, so there are definitely some different funding pots that are available. But again, it is around, we will see the application, the applications will tell us. There's going to have to be a little bit of fluidity amongst us to go, okay, based on the applications that we receive, and being able to assess that with the information we have at the time. The arts and culture, the funding in that realm doesn't seem to be as available as there is in other sectors. So that will be interesting to see what we receive from that community. But again, it will have to be, we haven't set it up so that 250,000 go to sport and recreation, etc. We've left it open to see the type of applications that we receive.
And will the reporting back be able to demonstrate that of the allocation, this is where it's gone? I'd love to see that, so that we as councillors feel confident that it's pretty balanced.
Through you, Madam Chair. Yes, and the fact that we would have, you know, decision makers on that panel to help ensure that balance is equitable.
Jill, $1 million, while it may seem a lot, actually, when you look at the number of organisations that may want to use the, apply for grants, and for some of those organisations and groups right now, they don't necessarily know the true extent of the impacts. So are you going to sort of pace out the $1 million, or is it all going to go within 3 months and then there's nothing left? Because that would be a real concern for me, because as I said, some organisations don't know the true extent and what their priority might be, maybe in 6 months' time. Thank you.
So as a response to that, those are the details that we're still working through. So at this point, it's policy level. We're still looking at the defined criteria and ensuring that, we are making good decisions and we're able to respond to the needs of the community, because potentially these organizations are applying for that central government funding and they come back to us and say, actually, we're short 20,000. Are we able to leverage and work together to fill those gaps to provide solid programming?
Thank you. Councillor Wang.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. You actually took a bit of what I was going to say, but that's okay. The question that I had was, continuing on from what the Chair has just mentioned, that it is a $1 million fund, and although that it sounds like a lot when it's shared around and spread around, how do we ensure that everyone gets a fair share? I see here that the minimum funding allocations of $10,000 as proposed. Is there a cap? Is there a limit as to the maximum?
Through you, Madam Chair. At this point, we've left the cap open. So minimum-wise, just around administrating a fund, and also knowing that a lot of our other philanthropic and gaming trusts can fill that under $10,000 gap. So yeah, I mean, we may get a really amazing, innovative, collaborative application that we would really want to fund. So we have not capped, at this point, we have not capped the fund.
Oh, thank you. Councillor, Mr. Berriman Kemp, sorry, thank you.
Yes, thank you. And through you, Madam Chair, thank you for your presentation. Look, I have two questions, but they are linked. First of all, thank you for the presentation. I certainly do support the fund, the concept. I support the approach that's been taken. However, my question is, how do we support the applicants to be able to fill in an application form to do things differently? Now, and I guess just to explain that this is a new fund, post-COVID, I fully support that we're going to have to do things differently. But my sense is a number of the community organisations you've outlined are normally done on a voluntary basis, and people are used to doing what they always do. So, again, my question is, how will groups know how to apply in this new way? The drop down from that will be, will there be a fund navigator to help work them through this? Because I guess looking at the report, I love the wheelhouse analogy. I think that makes sense. But from what you've outlined, the issue is that if the funders are the crew, you'll work out where you're going, but the passengers who are making the application may not necessarily know that. And as you outlined, based on the applications you receive, you'll make the decision. Well, that depends on what the applicant knows to fill in. So I think I might have chucked 3 questions in there, but hopefully you can answer that.
Through you, Madam Chair. I think it's a really good question as to how do we get the information out to communities and communicate that well. What we did with the partnership funds and so on last LTP was we actually ran a series of community workshops, invited lots of people and actually showed people what we were looking for, had examples, and people were able to talk that through. And generally we also provide support for people with their applications. Certainly with our enabled matching fund, we say to people, give us a call first and we'll give you a hand, just to help people to frame up what they're looking for, work out, is this the right fund to apply for, or can we direct them somewhere else? So, so Anita and our team does a lot of that work already, and our team members will also be supporting that. And I guess also we have our the other funders in our community. So Rotorua Trust has local resources and will be supporting too.
Thank you. Councillor Kai Fong.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This just goes back to the comments made by Your Worship and yourself, and it's just really around contestability for the fund, because as soon as it's advertised, you're likely to get a flood of applications. And so it's how do we ensure that the best applicants get that funding, but also because we probably we have felt some effects of COVID, but the real effects might actually not be for a few more months when things like wage subsidies actually run out. So how do we ensure that we retain enough of the fund to be able to have contestable applications, and we're funding the best applications that are going to fulfil the criteria?
Through you, Madam Chair, I think what we can do at this point is there is the opportunity to break it into quarters and look at that through the applications that come in and see the amount of funding that is available then. But again, you know, at this point, looking at having open applications, I don't want to set it up and say that it's first in, first served, because that's not the intention. And there is the opportunity. We want these organizations, some of them it's going to take a few months to sit down and collaborate and really get a really strong proposal to push forward. I think these are very good questions. I can't say that at this point I have all the answers for that, but that's the detail that we're working on at the moment. The other thing is again, through the input of our other funders. So we have Rec at the Table as an example, to help us through their experiences around how they've delegated and distributed their funding throughout the year.
Thank you. Councillor Kumar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through the Chair, thank you, Jill, for your presentation. I think the merit would probably lie on how it's contested with the responsibility that's going to be on the decision making. I think it's a good idea what you've presented to us today, and my question is hopefully we don't judge lots of organizations on the fact that they have applied elsewhere as well, because sometimes small groups might want $20,000, and their allocation probably from the council might only be $4,000. So they will continue to apply for funding in different organizations and scope themselves until they can reach that $20,000. So I just hope, and like I said, I just hope that the decision making is on the people that we entrust to deliver the contestability.
Thank you. Mr. Thomas, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. Look, thank you for your presentation, and I can really see a need for this fund, especially over the next year or so, and it does fit in with our current funding that we do. I'm excited by the idea or the opportunity for innovation as well, and so I'm hoping that when you're doing your workshops for groups, and also when we have navigators helping people through their applications, that we do look at those opportunities for groups to work together. You mentioned the $10,000 minimum as a sort of thing, and I, having been on the Community Grants Fund, I understand and respect that, but it may be that we have several groups that are needing some back-end support or administration support, and we could help them work together to come forward with an application that's maybe supporting 4 groups. So I just think that in the details that we're working on, that's something we need to accommodate and actually be really proactive about promoting.
Yes.
Through you, Madam Chair, there is the opportunity for that collaboration, that there is umbrellaed applications. So we may have organizations who normally, maybe they're a fledgling trust or just setting themselves up. So again, around that collaboration, they may work alongside an organization to put an application in to really deliver or provide service that didn't exist previously. So yes, we are looking for those types of applications, and yes, we would be willing to look at applications that we may not normally receive from an organization that doesn't have charitable status but has a partner that does.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, Jill, Rosemary, thank you for the presentation and also for the workshop that you ran, which was quite interesting. A question I didn't ask at the workshop was, I see that you sent your questionnaire out to 580 odd organisations, got 165 responses. Were you surprised either pleasantly or negatively by the number who actually responded? Can you read anything into that level of response? Because these are the organisations that are the glue in our community, and it's important they need support. But did that level of response to the questionnaire? Can you comment either way on that?
Sure, through you, Madam Chair. I personally, a 38% response rate is positive, and we had a really broad range of organisational responses. And very happy with the response from the Kaupapa Māori community that we traditionally haven't had great response rates from. And I think a lot of the feedback was honest and telling about their situations and where they are. So there was always opportunity through the questionnaire to provide their personal experience. I haven't detailed that because it identifies them specifically, and I wouldn't want to put them in a vulnerable position. But yes, we were pleased with that response rate. And I think that they are representative of our community, and I think that the information that we have moving forward does represent the others.
And I think, thank you. I think it's probably giving the organisations an opportunity to really put the lens and the spotlight on themselves at this point in time. I mean, obviously COVID has really made that necessary, but you know, the services that they provide, are they still relevant? Are they still the best group to be providing them? Do they need to deliver the services in a different manner? All of those sort of things, or their events or their activities, whatever it is. And I have to say that recently I was privy to some information that really just said there will be some community organisations that will not survive. And, you know, we have to recognise that. And for the best will in the world, they wanted to, but they no longer have the capacity to do that. So we do have to recognise that this is a community resilience fund. It is different from some of the other funds that we have available and that are available in the community. It is a resilience fund, and I'm sure that's what the focus is, and that's what the group, the representative group from the panel, I'm sure that they will have that for front of mind every time they look at the applications in front of them. So thank you. We do have 2, 3, and 4. I can take them all as a... Yes, Your Worship. Sorry. Thank you.
I'm 2 and 3.
Oh, 2 and 3. Sorry, I'm going to put it for the 4 one. Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Donaldson, did you want... Oh, you'll second it, so thank you. That's 2 and 3. So I'm going to... Oh, well, I'll put... We've had a mover and a seconder. We've had some good discussion. And this is just on 2 and 3. So, number 2, that the committee recommends that Council approve amendments to the current community funding investment policy to implement the Community Resilience Fund aimed at supporting our local community sector to build back better post-COVID-19. 3, that the Council approves one representative from each of the following: Rotorua Lakes Council, Lakes Community Board, Rural Community Board, and Te Tātou o Te Arawa, that should be Rotorua Lakes Councillor, to work on a panel with council officers to approve grants. So that's 2 and 3. I've had a mover and a seconder. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Contrary? Thank you. Carried. And number 4, that the committee recommends... we need a mover and a seconder for that. I understand there was... Your Worship, was there something there that you wanted to add to number 4?
Oh, yes, just thank you from Te Tātou. We've already received that Ms Marks is keen to be represented from Te Tātou, and I'm signalling that Councillor Yates would like to be the Rotorua Lakes Councillor. She feels a deep affection for this Resilience Fund. So I'm just signalling that here, and there's still the Community Board and Rural Board to come.
We'll do that.
Pardon? I wish to move.
Right, you want to move and second that. Thank you. Thank you. That the committee... so it's moved and seconded that the committee recommend to Council... that Councillor Yates be appointed to the Community Resilience Fund decision-making panel. Thank you. So I'll put that...
And Ms Marks.
Well, Ms Marks is from their own. That's outside of this. Yep. Thank you. Thank you. So I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Thank you. Carried. Seconded was Councillor Donaldson. Thank you. Now another biggie. This is 7.3. Excuse me. Oh, now. The Three Waters Service Delivery Reform. The stimulus program. Sorry, I'll just get that up on my... A mover and a seconder, please, that the report Three Waters Service Delivery Reform Bar stimulus program be received. Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. It's been moved and seconded that the report be received. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Contrary? Thank you, carried. Morena Stavros, good morning. Thank you.
The microphone.
Is the microphone
Read?
on? Oh, thank you.
Sorry. Take the report as read, and I would just like to make a couple of points. One, this is, although it is not necessary to be approved by the council in terms of initiating a entry discussion with our fellow TLAs and the Department of Internal Affairs of the government with regards to these reforms, we think it's very appropriate and proper that elected members are aware that these processes will commence soon. Basically, in order to allow us to enter into the discussions with other territorial local authorities and to start this long-term process, there are some entry gates to be achieved, and one of them is the signing of a memorandum of understanding between this council, represented by our chief executive, and the government. And once the MOU has been signed by the end of August, there are two other processes to be finalized in order to access some limited funding that's available to be used for the Three Waters networks for our territorial authority. And those additional plans involve what we call a funding plan and also a delivery plan. Those documents need to be signed by the end of September to commence the process. Again, it's in the context of discussions we had recently about the Three Waters reforms and also in the context of discussions for the last 2-3 years, the government now is initiating that exploratory process to identify perhaps better options or better solutions towards addressing some of the issues facing the Three Waters across the country. Now, while they've got some proposals on the table, at this point in time, what the government is proposing is to enable territorial authorities to discuss amongst themselves and provides an incentive for that through some limited funding provision to ensure that there is an acceptance and an agreement as to what is the best way forward. We anticipate this to be a long process, and we anticipate that in the context of going through the process, regular reports and updates have to be made to the council, because these are very significant decisions that eventually elected members have to be made. And if you do go along with the current draft proposals of forming some regional entities, for example, at some point in time, elected members will have to contemplate transferring about 50% of the replacement value of their current assets and something between 30 to 40% of their revenue base to some other authority. And obviously, there's a whole range of complexities behind it, which we still need to discuss with the various authorities and report back to you for your approval or your consideration in due course. This is simply an entry point. The report, I think, is self-explanatory, and more than happy to respond to any questions you may have for this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Stavros. I know you said this is an entry point, I just heard you say, but this could go on for quite some time in terms of, the development, or is that right? I mean, it looks, when I look at it all.
Madam Chair, the government's initial timetable is 3 years. I will dare to quote other people who are in the industry, and I also quote my own experience in terms of setting a Wellington regional entity that did not own assets. It took us about 8 years to get consensus of our sister TLAs down there. So I think 3 years is an extremely ambitious, time frame. So other professional entities in the Three Waters, in the Department of Internal Affairs, in Water New Zealand, Infrastructure New Zealand, their assumption is that for this process to be concluded could be anything between 3 and 7 to 8 years. So we don't know.
Thank you. Yes, Your Worship.
My question is, I understand in the way that you've structured the recommendation, which I absolutely support, having gone to the DIA workshop in Hamilton, there was agreement that you go through the open door. What happens after that, we're not sure of. But it's quite an interesting hook and bait for us to be able to access some funding. It's a very small amount of funding for our infrastructure needs, but I support it, as did every mayor that was at the Waikato region. I think our concern that I want to flag here is that we want to keep very much the autonomy of decision making at the TLA level. And so on those grounds, I see that we in this recommendation, we nominate our chief executive. I've got no problem if he's at the table negotiating, but also the expertise, I would hope you're right there beside him as an infrastructure engineer. But it is the principle of subsidiarity and local ownership and decision making that should matter to all of us. And that was actually the general consensus that I heard. And I didn't go to the the Auckland meeting, but that was what I heard coming back from those from the TLAs. So they are just signalling that's going to be some tension, but it's good to go through the open door and get what we can from it. So I'll certainly be supporting this recommendation. So my question, is how involved will you be in this discussion with DIA? And your role?
I don't want to preempt my chief executive's decision, but I assume I'll be with him to support him in this endeavour.
Thank you. Just a quick question: is this going to be, if there is a new government, this work will still continue? I mean, I should imagine. Well, gosh, it's necessary, so I should imagine, but I don't know if we can answer that.
Madam Chair, I don't know either.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Berriman-Kemp, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I have 3 questions. Maybe what I'll do is I'll just ask each one as I go through. First of all, Stavros, I see there's 2 components to the funding. One is for Rotorua Lakes Council and one is for the Bay Plenty Councils, and 2/3 need to agree to that. In your crystal ball gazing, what do you think the likelihood is of the other TLAs agreeing to be able to access the 21 million? So that's question number 1.
I think the direct allocation, Eugene, to the Rotorua Lakes Council is been designed on the basis of population and the land area. So $4.7 million is assured once we sign the MOU and sign the delivery plan and a funding plan. So some more hurdles to go through that yet, but we can get that money. The remaining 50% of the regional funding is recommended to be split again on the same basis. So I think provided that we can identify with our sister authorities there is a genuine intent to progress exploring the various complex matters of the transaction, the Department of Internal Affairs recommendation is to split the other 50%, i.e. another $4.5 to $4.7 million on the same basis, population and land. So until we start this process, I imagine that it should not be very difficult to achieve to achieve consensus. However, I don't know.
Thank you for that. My second question is regarding iwi engagement. Within the MOU itself on page 56, it specifically outlines the need for for discussions with iwi Māori to be included. What I'm interested in is how will that be achieved? Because from my reading of the paper, my understanding is that this will be a council-led process, and I'm wondering whether or not is there room for a Te Tato representative within that process? How are you planning to get the iwi input into that process as per the MOU?
I think there are two distinct tranches of work in that area. One, the government signals a clear intention that in order to achieve their freshwater goals, they want input from iwi in general, tangata whenua across the whole country. Each TLA will need to participate to this process through the MOU. And of course, we as a TLA, we do have a policy here of partnership with iwi. And I imagine that, as Her Worship said, and as my Chief Executive repeatedly says, is that we need to make sure that the unique idiosyncrasy and characteristics of the Rotorua district, which significantly includes a partnership with iwi, need to be recognized and facilitated effectively into that arrangement. So in actually sitting with our TLA, other sister TLAs to reach some agreements, I would imagine that we will involve our partners into that process as a TLA. The government have to do it at their own level, at the national level. We have to do it for our own level here too, because we made it into as a matter of policy for us to partner, with mana whenua on all elements related to at least to the three waters.
Thank you. And my third and last question is just in terms of 2.7, the delivery plan. I've just got such as. So can you give me an indication as to the type of things that are likely to be explored? I realise there's a really short time frame. But again, what I've heard is 4.71 million coming into council specifically. Potentially, if we get the other TLAs across the line, we could have twice that amount, theoretically, which is the best part of $9 million. So it might be a little bit early, but can you give me an indication as to what those funds might be used within the delivery plan?
The early information we've got at the moment with regards to this documentation indicates those funds, whether it's 4.7 or 9.4 million dollars, we get both tranches, can be used for maintenance, renewal, or upgrades of any of the three waters. We have to yet to discuss internally here as an executive team, and perhaps we'll share with with elected members during September, hopefully. But some examples might be accelerating some renewal programs, investing into our stormwater management improvements, which we know we've got some significant challenges. We can help some communities to accelerate wastewater reticulation, like Rotorua and Namotu area. We can earmark some of that money to help the upgrade of our water treatment plant, which obviously is going to be a significant burden onto the community. So it's a whole range of projects, and I think as someone from local government said a few months ago, you can spend all of council's budgets on three waters and it would not be enough. So $9 million, it's got a lot of holes to plug, if we need to do that. So, but we'll discuss with elected members what our preferred options would be.
Councillor McPherson.
Chair, I'm strongly supportive of this. I had the advantage, like the Mayor and Councillor Kumar, of attending a workshop that really went through the details of this material, and what I picked out are crucial objectives, and I'm strongly supportive of the CE and our engineer attending these on our behalf. But the bottom line of the agreement is a co-design process to co-design water service delivery entities, and those entities are going to be multi-regional, and they're going to explore the potential benefits from aggregation. And I think that's a very worthwhile agenda, but they're going to offer also an asset owning approach which could realign balance sheets of both and relieve us of some of our debt, and potentially explore funding instruments and improve balance sheet, because they will have the capacity, these new entities will have the capacity probably to borrow, so we were given to understand anything up to 400 or 500% of their revenues of their assets, which is certainly the sort of scale that's required across the country to give us the investment we need. It'll certainly potentially improve access to capital. These entities are going to have competency-based boards, which can only be helpful. They're going to focus initially on wastewater and on drinking water provision as a priority. But they will be publicly owned entities. And to ratepayers, of course, that's very important because it means we won't be funding profits if there's no private enterprise involved. So
you've got a question there?
Yes, I'm just trying to sense how it is that we will be able to, as a result of all this process, and it could, as somebody's pointed out, take 3 years, how could we then generate simultaneously a regulatory framework? I assume it's going to require new legislation at national level.
Thank you, Councillor McPherson. I think what you just outlined there is just reinforces what I said earlier. There are heavyweight issues to be managed. I think, and I don't really want to go into detail at the moment, but at the end of the day, if those are going to be public entities owning the public assets, they have to pay for these assets and the management somehow. Whether it's going to be through a local rate or regional rate or taxation, just it's going to come out of someone's pocket, to be paid for. So the question for us as a TLA is to make sure, and for you as elected members, is that is at the end of the day the process to be recommended, and I don't know what would be, in the best interest of your ratepayers. And that's why we have to go through that process. But as you said, there will be a whole range of new legislation, to be enacted and considered and consulted, And so that's what I said. That's why I said it's going to take some time to get to that end point.
Thank you. Yes. Mr. Thomas?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. Thank you, Stavros, for this report. And I support this initial stage of engagement with the government, although I must admit I have a certain amount of trepidation about the possible loss of local control over facilities and also over charges applied for those services. I note that in the report there is quite a considerable mention around potable water. I know that we have a lot of issues around stormwater and wastewater, but my question is, out of that 4.71 million or the 9.8 million that would be available, my question is, will we be looking at the possible extension of our reticulation networks for potable water? So we have a lot of areas that outside of the urban area that do not have water supplies, and a lot of those areas have unsafe water supplies from bores, contaminated bores, stuff like that. So it's my question, my hope, that we can be looking at the possibility of extending our potable water networks as well as addressing wastewater and stormwater.
Thank you, Phil. There are a significant amount of needs and expectations and requirements for all our three waters, as you rightfully said. That might be improving water supply, quality water supply, reticulation systems, upgrade of capacity and treatment capacity, and so on. I would not be way off the mark if I said to you, over the next LTP, you'll be considering the near future for the next 10 years. In consideration of all the needs, you'll be talking about hundreds of millions of dollars of investment required. Now, $9 million probably is going to be a contribution to that, but that will not going to change overall priorities. You will decide as elected members as to how do you want to proceed with those kind of infrastructure enhancements in the next 30 years. So, as I said earlier, there are many ways to use this $9.4 million. We will make some recommendations, and hopefully we will hit the right mark.
Councillor Kaifong?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, just a question which probably follows on from Mr. Thomas. So with the delivery plan, it is for creation of jobs as well as infrastructure renewal or maintenance. No? Oh, sorry. And so just to see if we could leverage what is effectively money that we didn't think was coming to also assist us with housing. Is there an opportunity there to use this fund not only for job creation but help us leverage our housing plan by addressing stormwater issues?
Thank you, Councillor Kaifong. Yes, absolutely. I think sort of as I said earlier, this funding can be used either for the maintenance, renewal, or upgrade of any of the three waters. And obviously, stormwater upgrading is growth related, and we can use it. We already got $15 million for stormwater support for the eastern land proposed developers in Wharenui area and towards the airport. It's fair to say we need about 40. So it's always a bigger need than actually the funding we've got. But the answer is yes, we can use it. But as I said, there are a whole range of considerations we need to put into factor there.
Yes, thank you, Stavros. And I've heard you say that the detail is yet to be worked through. So I appreciate that. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you. I think my question's probably to the Chief Executive, and it concerns attachment 1 on page 55, the principles for working together. And I'm supportive of us authorising the Chief Executive to go down this path on our behalf. Those principles, I'd just like Jeff, if you could perhaps comment on those principles, because I think they're particularly important, the way we conduct ourselves. I know this will go beyond, this process will go beyond an election, so the rule book goes out the window there to an extent. But, matters like a no surprises approach and mutual trust and respect, I think are critical, but it works both ways with no surprises. So you'll be bringing key decisions for our assets back to this council to take forward on our behalf into your discussions. Am I right there? Could you comment, please?
Through the chair, look, absolutely. I think this is going to be a long road, and there are, in fact, many parties that need to actually be at the table with respect to understanding the opportunities, but also the implications of any decision in this area. I think the point was made well before that iwi will have a particular interest in the nature of services of this nature, but so will our general public. I think what I'm hearing across many councils at the moment is some rather optimistic thinking that somehow or other we are able to take billions of dollars worth of assets away from councils, and all of a sudden our public is not going to have to pay for them anymore. I think that is exceedingly optimistic, because at the end of the day, this asset class will require significant increases in funding. That's the reality, and someone's got to pay for that. And if you look at the current balance sheet of even central government at the moment and the level of expenditure being incurred, I don't see that necessarily government even is going to be in a position to simply say we will debt fund billions of dollars worth of funding required for this. So this is actually going to come back to communities to pay for at the end of the day, in my view. I think the key thing about this, and the Mayor I think has already touched on it, is that the principles outline a very good way of working together, but they also outline some of the intents here. And what we would aim to is what sort of efficiencies or scale advantages can we actually accrue through more efficient collective management. But at the same time, I think one of the things that we need to be careful about is the loss of local control. I think the situation with the puna at Rangawewahi would evidence very clearly the risk when an entity outside comes in with imposed solutions and does not have adequate understanding or relationships to be able to make prudent decisions as to how infrastructure should be actually undertaken in a local area. So I think that one of the key things here will be satisfying yourselves that local ability to control the nature of interventions, but also to prioritise interventions is essential. Another example would be the experience that I suspect we have had over many years with regards to a lack of investment into state highways, which has actually prevented the development of homes and housing in Rotorua. Again, another example where from the asset class, the roading asset class, the decision no doubt made a lot of sense. But when you look at the value created for our community and the fact that those decisions actually stop the development of housing, would say that the lack of understanding of the implication of decision was not well understood when it was actually made. And so there is an essential discussion here as to how do we, at the same time as potentially creating value, how do we actually ensure that removal of local decision making doesn't result in a loss of value, because at the end of the day, all of these assets are about creating communities. And the moment that we lose the ability of communities to be able to understand and have some control about how that value actually takes place is where we actually start losing the actual purpose of these assets.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for that answer. And having sat at the regional transport plan decision making, I couldn't agree more.
Thank you. Your Worship, thank you.
I just think, I hate the word going forward, but the implications for this are probably going to require quite a substantial workshop. I question myself, what is the shape of local government councils and what is being proposed in the bigger picture? And that's what we mustn't lose sight of. If you take the Three Waters away from us as a territorial local authority, we've got to ask, what's a TLA here for? So we've got to be very cautious as we proceed along these lines.
Yes, it does cause some thinking. What might we look like in the future? That's good. So thank you. Yes, certainly. Thank you, Jeff.
If I could just make one comment to that end, there are discussions already occurring between LG&Z and Solgum and also with DIA. I think what I would say would be to repeat an experience, Your Worship, that you had yourself this morning, that when something's happening in this community, the first port of call is this organisation. And when there is uncertainty from business owners and individuals in this community this morning with regards to what's happening with regard to COVID-19, this organisation and you personally were inundated with those requests. And I think that goes very well to demonstrate what local government is really about, and it's about community leadership. In my view, and the discussions that I've heard to date, is that it is a mistake to actually think that the role of councils is just simply about the services they provide. It's actually the services have to be to an end point, and that is growing value in the community. And I don't believe that need will actually cease. It may change, but it certainly would not cease.
Councillor McPherson, yes, please.
Thank you. Just one point. At the workshop I attended, it was heavily stressed that this proposal from the Minister enjoyed cross-party support across the House. But the other question is that I've got, it concerns the role of the Three Waters Steering Committee. What participation have we had in that? And what has that experience been like?
Yes, Your Worship.
Well, none. So, and we don't need to. But your member organisation, LG&Z, has had a lot of interaction with key government ministers about the future direction. And if we get to our local government conference and the AGM, there's a big discussion around localism. What does it mean? What does it look like into the future? So through the governance and strategy group that I sit on, lots of discussion about Three Waters, with LGNZ Executive and Council, even more discussion with central government. I think everybody acknowledges, as Stavros has told us, that the infrastructure pressures nationally are enormous. And so it's all of government approach as to how we're going to cope with that.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Your Worship, it'll be interesting to see what the views of Maruata Group, the Maruata Group, which are the elected Māori representatives, local body Māori representatives, because they'll certainly, most of them are very familiar, well, have been for some time, on the work that the iwi Leaders Group have been doing in this Three Waters space too. So thank you. No further. Thank you for that. Thank you for your presentation. Oh, so it's been, no, we haven't had a mover in a second. Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. Thank you, Councillor Kaifong. So it's been moved and seconded. Oh, here we are. That the committee, I'll read them through, right through. So I'll go right through from take them as, thank you very much. I'll take them as read. Thank you for that. Thank you. I'll take them as read. We're looking at 2.1 right through to 2.7. So we do have a mover and a seconder for all of those, for 2.1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I've had a mover and a seconder, so I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you, carried. Thank you, councillors. And we have, thank you, 7.4. Thank you. 7.4, may I have a mover and a seconder, please, for the motion that the report exchange of reserve land, Towie Street, be received. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Fisher, and, sorry, who was the other one? Councillor Yates. Thank you, Councillor Yates. So I'll put that motion that the report exchange of reserve land, Towie Street, be received. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you. Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, councillors and board members. Back in June 2017, Council had made a decision to undertake a swap of these two properties. Since then, we've gone through the process of the Reserves Act and public consultation. Out of that have fallen no issues, so all they're asking at this time is for Council to reconfirm its decision, and we will proceed with the exchange of the land as outlined.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Thomas.
I just wanted to move the recommendation.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Trumper. Thank you. Are there any points of clarification or questions on this one? It shouldn't. Thank you. Well, I'm going to put that motion, thank you, that the committee recommends to Council that the parcels of land, Lot 4 Reserve and Lot 1 Private, on LT 519564 be exchanged under the provisions of the Reserve Act 1977. It's been moved and seconded. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you, carried. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Well, we are going to go into public excluded, and that's concerning the disposal of property, 202 Old Topol Road, and 2, the disposal of property, Westminster Drive. So could I have a mover and a seconder that the Council move into public excluded, please? Thank you, Councillor Fisher. Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. It's been moved and seconded that we go into public excluded, into the public excluded session. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you, carried. What did I say? Councillor Fisher? Oh, beg your pardon. Sorry. Beg your pardon for that. Councillor Wang.